Adobe Illustrator is an incredible, powerful, and useful tool for designers. I've done about 85% of my design work in my long freelance career in Adobe Illustrator, and it's become the cornerstone software for my design business. This extensive course will first walk you through the basics of Adobe Illustrator as I review how to create shapes, the curvature tool, and go into full detail on how to master that pen tool, where we trace and recreate simple and complex shapes together. We will quickly move into our first project, creating a full icon set. We'll learn how to practice many tools while creating our icon set, including reviewing stroke panel, alignment panel, the width tool, artboards, shadows, gradients, exporting files, and more. Our next project will be the creation of a logo design, where we work with type tools and talk about best practices in logo design and using grids. We will tackle yet another logo design and talk about how to best utilize several tools, including working with color and what type of files and formats you need to export. We will then take this logo design and create a series of flyers and posters for this newly created company look. We'll talk about proper layout design theory, using grids, the rule of thirds, how to crop photos, working with headlines and type hierarchy, all this while continuing to practice and use Adobe Illustrator's powerful vector tools. And lastly, we'll also learn how to properly set up a document and export it for the press. This simple course was designed to get you comfortable in Adobe Illustrator as fast as possible through real practical design projects. So I look forward to having you as a student. Welcome to Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator is a vector-based design tool. Objects, lines, and shapes that are created in Adobe Illustrator are created using an equation. That means when you scale an object larger or smaller, the equation scales those objects so they maintain a perfect resolution no matter the size. Adobe Illustrator is an incredible, powerful, and useful tool for designers. I've done about 85% of my design work in my long freelance career in Adobe Illustrator, and it's become the cornerstone software for my design business. I highly recommend that all logo designs are created in Adobe Illustrator because of that vector environment and the ability to scale logos, symbols, and objects to any size without reducing the quality or the resolution. A lot of large and small scale print projects are created in Illustrator, including poster designs, banner designs, billboards, and brochures. T-shirt designs and even icons are other objects that are readily designed in Adobe Illustrator. The pen tool is an amazing tool that gives you the chance to create any shape imaginable. We'll focus heavily on the pen tool in this class and create a wide variety of symbols, icons, and objects. We will create an icon set that we can use later on in the course. We'll also create a few logo designs, as well as several different layouts for a poster design. New projects will be added to this section frequently, so feel free to check your email for announcements of new project additions to the course. Let's go ahead and head into Adobe Illustrator and get our dashboard set up so you can work alongside me on these projects in the class. Are you ready to learn one of my favorite Adobe products? Let's get started. Welcome to Adobe Illustrator. First things first, I want to make sure that I match my desktop with what you see. And so there's a couple ways we can do that. I'm going to set the desktop to a specific preset setting. I'm going to go ahead and go through that with you right now. So we're going to go up to Window, and we're going to go to Workspace. And right now mine is highlighted on Layout. But we also want to reset the workspace so we can get all the default windows popped up so we can start to create the workspace that you're going to be seeing throughout this part of the class. So I'm going to go down to Reset Layout. So it doesn't matter what you're on right now, just go ahead and reset the layout and go back up to Window and go to Workspace. Okay, so we have Layout and we also reset the layout so it's back to where it would be if you first opened Adobe Illustrator. So this is the default. I have the 2019 version of Adobe Creative Cloud. So your version may be slightly different. Most of the tools are going to be the same, but just letting you know I'm teaching in the 2019 updated version, and there's some new tools, and I'll talk to you throughout the class about which tools may not be included in which versions as I use them. So let's get our windows to match. So now we're going to eliminate some windows I don't believe we're going to be using through the class. Just kind of cleans up your desktop area and you don't feel like you have so many options screaming at you. It kind of simplifies your environment. So we are going to use the transform panel. We are going to use the align panel. The swatches and the color panel are very, very important, so we're going to leave those in place. The color guide, I'm just going to go ahead and slide that out and going to go ahead and close that window for now. So we just have colors and swatches here. Gradient, we're going to be using gradients a lot in this class, so let's keep that. Stroke is a very highly used panel that I like to always keep open and available, so make sure that is in a nice prominent position. Artboards, I'm going to go ahead and close that for now. We are going to talk about artboards, but let's try to simplify our layout here. We can always bring a new window open at another time. I'm also going to close down libraries. I'm going to keep my layers panel here, so I can go ahead, you can drag these and combine them together. So I'm going to put my layers panel along with these other two panels. So I have a nice simple layout. You can also have some pull-out options here. So character and paragraph are very important. The open type, not as much for this particular class. So I'm just deleting anything I don't need. So these character and paragraph and this little pull-out menu is important to keep on there. Just kind of going through all of these. That's a repeat. Okay. We'll leave these in for now. But what I'd like to do is take this character and paragraph panels and go ahead and drag them out of that little extra pull-out menu because they are so important and so readily used. So now I was able to kind of create this own little module. And I'm going to go ahead and slide that right over here by color. And so now I have swatches, color, character, and paragraph. So you can even bring color. Let's see, we can kind of arrange these in a particular way. Let's bring stroke up here to the top. And you don't have to have it exactly like me, but as long as you have these particular windows available, you can arrange them how you feel comfortable. If you see a window missing or you accidentally close out a window, just go up to window and you can bring out any of these that I talk about through the class. So if I start talking about the brushes and you're not seeing the brush window, just go to window and click on brushes and you'll be able to bring that window out and you could drag it and create whatever window you'd like or arrangement of windows. And same thing with some of these I don't use very frequently and some of them I will use daily. So that's how you bring out windows. And so we have our desktop set up. So now that we have our desktop set up, the next few lessons are going to go over the basics, tools, and layout of Illustrator. And then I'm going to move on to the pen tool and then some more advanced tools as we work on projects. We'll be able to do projects together and work with those tools as we do it. So this is the point in the class, the next 30 to 45 minutes, where you can start to skip a lesson or two if you already feel comfortable about that topic. So the next few lessons are going to be very basic. If you already feel comfortable with a little bit of the basics of Illustrator, feel free to skip around a few lessons until you get to the level, or if you want to skip right to that project development part of the class, please feel free to take this class at your own pace. So I'm going to start off with a really fun and easy tool to use, and that's the shape tool. So that's going to be the 5th position down, and it may be in a slightly different position depending on what version you are, but it looks just like this. And anytime you have a little arrow at the bottom right, you can click and hold and you'll be able to get another pull-out menu. If you want this pull-out menu to stick, you go over here to this little arrow and you're able to kind of drag it around just like a window. I'm going to go ahead and close that out and go ahead and select the rectangle tool. So you're going to go ahead and click and drag and create a simple rectangle. So you'll notice there's what's called a stroke around the box and what is also called a fill in the inside. So the inside is a fill and the outside is a stroke. And we work a lot with strokes in Illustrator, especially when it comes to logo design and typography, and when we're doing icons and symbols, strokes are very important to kind of know and master. So how do I change these colors? How do I switch them out? If you go down here, this is the fill option right here, this little swatch, and then right down here is going to be your stroke option. So you can always just change these colors by double clicking, and you have your little color picker, and you could slide down, maybe make that darker, and then click on the blue and make that a green color, or maybe let's do an orange color. So now we have an orange fill and a red stroke, but let's say that stroke is way too thick. Let's change the stroke thickness to make it a more thin line. So we're going to go ahead and select our object, and we're going to go over to our stroke panel. So you remember when I talked about how important that stroke panel is and how often we're going to be referring to it. So what I like to do with Windows is sometimes if there's a big gap between where I'm working and kind of the panels, I like to kind of drag it out so I can keep it close by so I don't have to go all the way over to the right to make options. So I just dragged that window out, and now I can make some adjustments. So that has a 14-point weight. So let's reduce that to 7. So I'm just going to go down to 7, and you notice it made it a lot skinnier. So let's say I don't like this really sharp right edge. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. I really don't like that angle. It's too sharp. I want a nice smooth stroke. So let's go ahead and select our object, and we could go down here to corner. And we're going to go to a round join, which is the middle option. And you noticed how it made it a nice round shape as opposed to a sharp right angle shape. We can always just select our object and switch back to a corner or a round join. There's also another option, which is a bevel join, which kind of gives it that little bit of an angle. But I'm going to go ahead and keep it on round join and go ahead and drag my stroke panel back. And let's say I want to switch the colors. I want red on the inside, but orange is my stroke. You can go down to here to this little arrow, swap fill and stroke. You can also, there's also a keyboard shortcut, Shift X, if you're interested in the shortcut. But you can go ahead and just flip it back and forth, and so now it kind of switched positions. Let's say I'm sick of the stroke. I really just want a simple box. I don't want a stroke. Go ahead and select your object. Go ahead and click down on this stroke fill, and we're going to go down to none. So this is going to be the option to eliminate that stroke altogether. So go ahead and click on this none symbol, and it's going to disappear. And the same thing goes, I'm going to do Command Z, which is just a very quick shortcut to go back one step. So I'm going to do Command Z, which goes back to the step I just was on. And you could also do the same thing if you select the fill. So I'm selecting the fill swatch, going down here to none, and I can just have a stroke, and this is transparent. I'm going to go ahead and do this so you can see that it's kind of a transparent box. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now that we kind of understand fill and stroke and shapes, let's go ahead and create a few other shapes real quick to kind of practice. And I have these on a stroke. So when we go ahead and make our circle, and you notice, oh, that's a nasty looking circle. That's not a perfect circle. How do I make a perfect circle? There's a little keyboard shortcut. All you have to do is hold down the Shift key and then drag. It'll make a perfect circle. So let's go ahead and hold down Shift, click, and drag. So now we have some nice, beautiful circles. So let's create a few other shapes. So I'm going to hold down, let's do a polygon. Now I have a stroke on this polygon, but I want to switch it to a fill, so I'm going to go down here and swap it out. So now I have a solid shape. Let's see what else we have. We have the star. Make a star. I'm holding down Shift to make a perfect star. If I did not hold down Shift, sometimes the shapes do not come out perfect, like we saw with the circle. So now that we have our object, we can change the location very easily by just holding and shifting it around, but we can also change the angle. So I'm going to go here. This is called the bounding box, that little blue line that goes all the way around the object. You go up to the corners and you'll get a little arrow symbol that looks just like this. Go ahead and click and hold and you'll be able to change the angle. What's great about the latest version of Illustrator is it shows you the exact angle that you're spinning the object, which could be very helpful if you want to spin it exactly at 90 degrees. So now I just switched that object 90 degrees and rotated it. So now I'm going to talk about anchor points. And anchor points is the lifeblood of Illustrator. Everything works with, every object has anchor points. So I'm going to go ahead and select this object and show you what an anchor point is. So now that I have this object selected, I'm going to take this is the direct selection tool, which I'm able just directly to select something and shift it around. But I'm going to go down to the direct selection tool, which is the hollowed out arrow, and this gives me the ability to see all the anchor points in the object. So you see this has 6 different anchor points all the way around the object. And I can click on any of these anchor points and manipulate it in any way. So if I wanted to shift this out, I can. I just click and hold and I'm able to kind of adjust these anchor points to create any shape that I need. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the pen tool, and I'm going to create a few shapes and manipulate those anchor points so you can see the wide variety of shapes that you can create in Illustrator. So the pen tool. This is how you can access the pen tool. It's going to be the third one down. Of course, it could be in a slightly different position, but this is exactly what it looks like. We're going to go ahead and click and hold, and we're just going to select the pen tool, which should be the top option. We're going to cover these lower options here shortly. So we're going to select the main pen tool, and we're going to be creating, the pen tool helps us create and manipulate these anchor points to create a wide variety of shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and click once, and I created an anchor point, and you'll notice I have a chance to kind of press the anchor point again to create a shape. So in this case, it'll be a simple line. So I clicked once, I'm going to come over here and click again, and I have a simple shape. And so right now this is on a fill, and what we want to do is flip it to a stroke. So now we can see our line. So we just made a simple line. We're going to continue to make some different kind of shapes. So let's make a triangle together. So I'm going to click down here, I'm going to click up right here. You click down, and there's certain things called smart guides, which we'll get to a little bit later, and we'll be able to make a perfect triangle by having our guides on. But right now I have them off for the sake of teaching this lesson. But let me go ahead and zoom in so you go ahead and see, select that direct selection tool, and you'll be able to see the 3 anchor points that we created. And let's say this is off a little bit. I think that line is not completely straight. I'm going to just click with the direct selection tool and shift it down. Let's say I want to make it more of a fat triangle. I can just select that and bring it down. So let's continue to create a few other shapes with the pen tool. So I have the pen tool selected, and I switch between the pen tool and the direct selection tool often. So I'll go ahead and create a shape. So let's say this kind of strange triangle, and then I just go back to that direct selection tool and I'm able to manipulate it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So let's create a more complex shape. And we need to add some curves to our shape. So we can create simple triangles and boxes, but they're all just straight. How do we create those curves that you see in logo designs? I'm going to go ahead and select the pen tool. I'm going to click like we would to create a line, but I'm going to click and I'm going to hold. So I'm going to hold while I'm clicking, and I'm able to kind of create a rounded shape. Just like that. And I just click off on the selection tool, and I'm able to complete my shape. So let's keep going with that. Go ahead and grab our pen tool, and let's do a wavy line. So I'm going to do the same thing but with multiple points. I'm going to go over to here, you can click and hold. I'm going to create kind of an upward. You could do a downward or an upward kind of movement curve. So I created that, and instead of clicking here, I'm just going to keep going. It's going to allow me to create another curve, and then I'm going to go over here, click, and do kind of an upward. And this takes a little bit of time to master. It could be a little uncomfortable when you first try it. It took me a while to kind of get comfortable with it. So don't worry if you feel like, oh, which direction do I go? Let's create it one more time, but let's do a tight kind of curvy shape. So let me go ahead and select pen tool. Let's do a nice tight curve. So I'm just going to go up, down, I'm going to click, and then you'll notice it's straight again. So now I need to go back to the point where I want the next anchor point to be, click, and then go up, and then click back here. And then we're going to do the same thing, click and hold up, create our shape, and then click back. And one more time, wherever we want our anchor point to be, and then we make our curve, and then back. So we're able to kind of make a tight kind of bound. I'm like, okay, well that's not quite really even? How do I kind of adjust these anchor points on this particular line shape? Let's get our direct selection tool, which is how we see our anchor points, and you'll notice all the anchor points that we just completed, and we can click on these and manipulate what are called handles to be able to change the shape that we created, the curve shape. We can actually change that. So let's say this one's a little fat. Let's go ahead and change that. So I'm going to click on this anchor point, and this long bar is called your handles. So this is how you're going to manipulate the curve of any anchor point. So I'm going to take the top point of this curve and adjust it a little bit. You can adjust it this way. You can select this one and also adjust. And you can kind of get your curves to match a little better, because sometimes it's hard to do by hand. And this is where grids come in handy, and we'll talk about grids a little bit, kind of help guide you a little bit. So just making some adjustments. I could shift this whole thing over, bring this over as well, just using the direct selection tool and manipulating my anchor points. I could change the thickness of the line by using stroke panel. So just have my stroke out. I'm going to increase my stroke a couple times. Okay, and I'm going to go to cap. So you'll notice at the end of this line, this kind of rough, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, it's kind of rough ending to this line. And you'll notice that with all the default lines you create with the pen tool. But let's say I want this to have a nice smooth cap at the end. So I'm going to go up here to cap. You notice how we did corner in the previous video. We're going to go up to cap and do a round cap. So you'll notice now the line has a nice rounded finish. So we're going to tackle our first little mini project. We're going to take this polygon tool that we created simply by using the shapes tool. We did the polygon tool, and I believe we rotated it by 90 degrees. And so what I'm kind of noticing here is a little bit of a 3D cube that we can create. So we're going to create a couple of different objects with the pen tool to create a 3D cube. And we're going to use this layer as our guide. So I'm going to go ahead and select a different color so I can tell the difference between the different shapes. Let's do a purple color. I'm going to go ahead and grab that pen tool, and I'm going to draw boxes around here to create kind of a cube shape, just to practice the pen tool in creating different anchor points. So I'm going to create one side of the cube. I'm going to go click down here on this corner, click up here, click about. We can always adjust it later. We're just making a simple box. And so you'll notice when I go back to my original first anchor point and I go back to click on it, you'll notice this little circle. And this is how you close a shape. Once you do this, you'll have a completed shape. You have one anchor point that goes right back to the original anchor point and it creates a shape. If you didn't do that, it would really just be an incomplete shape. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and now I have a complete shape that we just created with 4 different anchor points. So let's say I think that's off a little bit. I can just grab my direct selection tool, click it, and shift it up a little bit. So let's continue to make our cube. Let's grab the pen tool. Let's do a different color. Let's just do like a lighter shade to show highlights. Click up here. And I'm going to simply create the top part of our object. And so now we have a way to create this other side. So I'm going to grab, I want to sample this color. So I can click it, but I also want to get the eyedropper tool. Go ahead and highlight this color. I want to grab that color. And so I want to double click on the swatch so I can go ahead and change the color. I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go down a little bit. I'm trying to show dimension with lighting. So I just want to do a little bit of a darker shade, maybe right there. Great. So I'm showing a little bit more dimension there. So let's draw our last square. So I'm going to grab the pen tool. I'm just going to cover up this last little bit. And I'm going to make that a little bit of a darker color to show a third dimension. Just like that. So I made that kind of the highlight and made that the low light. So we just created a cool cube. So I'm going to select my object, this one panel or this one side of the box. I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to click on the top. So now I selected the top on the side, and I'm going to hold down Shift again, and I'm going to be able to select this side. So by holding down Shift, I can click and select multiple objects. So now I'm just, let me hold down Shift and select that one side. I'm just going to shift this over. So this was our base, our guide. We no longer need that shape. So now we have this cube. And I can right click now that I clicked on one, held shift, click the top. I'm continuing to hold shift. I'm going to click that last part. All three are selected. And I want to be able to group these together as one single object. Right now they're three different objects. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to just go to group. And what's great about this is I don't have to hold shift to connect them all or select them all. They're all grouped together as one wonderful object. So I'm going to hold down shift and make this smaller. And I can just copy and paste. I can create multiple kind of cubes, if you will. And I can make kind of a pattern out of this. I'm just copying and pasting, making a little pattern. And you can also go ahead and copy it. There's a real kind of a shortcut to copy and paste. And that's holding down the Alt button. Holding down the Alt button. Okay, just go ahead and skip all that. This is a new version, so I haven't gone through the tours yet. I'll hold down that Alt key. I believe I'll go ahead and research and put up what it would be on a Windows. I believe it's going to be different than the Alt key on the Windows, but you hold down the Alt key and I can make all sorts of duplicates as I just continually hold down the Alt key and Shift. So instead of having to sit there and do Command C, Command V, which is the shortcut to copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, you can just hold down that Alt key and drag and create all sorts of different options that we can create. So I'm just going to go ahead and play around with this a little bit, kind of creating a little three-dimensional kind of environment. If anybody grew up in the 1980s, you know Cubert, which is the game that existed on this little 3D plane. And so we can make small adjustments by clicking and moving it, but you can also make little small movements by using your arrow keys on your keyboard. So let's say I want to make this adjustment. I want to kind of move it up and down until I get it perfect. I'm just going to do the up and left keys until I kind of find the right. This is a great way to kind of slightly nudge something if you don't feel like you can click and drag it to the right point. Just use your little arrow keys and it'll help kind of make little small, minute adjustments. And sometimes zooming in, you can make more micro adjustments that way. So just here in a few minutes, we were able to kind of create this cool kind of cube-shaped environment. You can download in this lesson a practice sheet where you can practice drawing simple shapes using the pen tool. The pen tool can take some getting used to, so take your time doing this practice sheet, and I'll see you in the next lesson. So now I'm going to talk about the curvature tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a simple shape. I'm going to go down to shapes and let's do a star. Let's do something with a lot of sharp edges. And the great thing about the curvature tool is it's able to take sharp edges and convert them to rounded curves. So we're going to go here to the curvature tool. Let's click on that. It's right below the regular pen tool. We're going to go ahead and click on our object, or actually select our object first and then click on the curvature tool. And it'll be able to show all the anchor points. But instead of the square anchor points, you'll notice they have little circles. So you're going to double click this top anchor point and it's going to convert this sharp edge to a curve. All I'm doing is just double clicking and I'm able to convert all of these to a soft rounded curve shape. And to show you another example, I'm going to go ahead and create a polygon with the shapes tool. I'll hold down shift so I can make a perfect polygon. I'm going to grab that, go ahead and select our shape and then go ahead and grab our curvature tool. And notice all the anchor points that are being converted to the circles. So I'm going to double click the circles and you'll notice what happens. So I double click all these. And it kind of create a circle. So just kind of showing the power of that tool in action. And you can also click and hold and be able to kind of change the bend of that particular option. So if you wanted to kind of shift a curve without changing all the other anchor points around it, you could do that. So if you wanted to create like a moon shape, you could do that and shift it around. So you could see how you can create kind of a really wide gamut of shapes by using this tool. And when you double click, it'll convert it back to its kind of right sharp angle. So if I go back to our little star that we created, go ahead and select our object and go to the curvature tool, and I'm going to double click. Oops, I think actually it was the top that I double clicked. Double click, and it converts it back to the sharp angle. So you can just keep toggling those when you create your shapes. So that is the curvature tool. What better way to practice the pen tool is to draw real-world symbols or shapes. So I went ahead and downloaded this vector pack from allfreedownload.com. I'm going to be providing a link in this lesson to be able to grab those so you can have these shapes and you can trace along with me so we can practice that pen tool. So I kind of put these in a specific order from kind of easier, what I think would be easy to do, to maybe a little bit more challenging. So we'll go ahead and trace all these, work down to the bottom, and really kind of master not only straight edges, but also getting those curves right, especially with that middle one. It could be a little tricky, so we'll go ahead and trace these and practice that pen tool. So let's go ahead and start with this very first symbol. And I'm going to go ahead and make it black or some other different color so that you can tell the difference between where you're drawing and what is underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the pen tool and go ahead and start tracing this. So these are simple rectangle shapes, so I'm just going to click down here in the corner or whatever corner you'd like to start on. And I'm just going to go ahead and create anchor points on each corner. And I'm going to go back and complete my shape. So I'm going to go right back to that original point and see the little circle. I'm able to close my shape. So I just drew a simple rectangle. I'm going to keep going with this. So I'm going to go ahead and take this tool. I'm going to make it a different color so I can tell the difference between the two. I'm going to draw this shape over here. Same thing we just did. You might even be able to copy and paste it and make it simple. So now I'm going to make the connecting shape. I'm going to go down here and make the connecting shape and make that a little bit of a different color. You can always maybe make it darker. That might work well. You're going to have a dark to light kind of movement. So let's go ahead and remove the symbol below. And there's our new one that we created. Very quick and easy with 3 different shapes put together. Okay, so let's move on to a little bit more curves. So there might be a little bit of a shortcut to this one. So we can sit here and take the pen tool and we can click right here in this area. Go all the way. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can show you what I'm doing. Maybe click right here and then go ahead and click on this little corner, and I can hold and create kind of a rounded shape. Click over here to right where I think the curve starts, click, and then go right down here to where I think the curve ends, click, and go ahead and make my curve. So this is the long way to do it. I'll show you a shortcut in a little bit, but this is good practice. Click and hold, click, and I'm going to go back to complete my shape, hold, and I just made myself a shape. So here's a little bit of a shortcut when you have a perfect square like this. I like to make a square shape or rectangle shape. Gotta hold down Shift. Go ahead and make it. I can switch it to a stroke if I want to see underneath it and kind of line it up. And then I'm able to create curves. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this little symbol right here. I'm going to click and hold. And it's going to be able to create a curve for me. And what's great is it creates a curve on all 4 corners. But I can also click on this and make it a little less round if I'd like. Or click and hold. And I believe if you have an older version of Illustrator, I believe 2015, I have to go and check the versions, but if you have an older version of Photoshop, you may not have this little nice rounded corner option. But that's just like a little trick if it's a perfect square. So that's the one we did by hand. So let's do this one by hand. So we're going to grab the pen tool. We're going to click, and I like to click where I think the curve starts so that I can click where I think the curve ends and then be able to make it that way. Go up to the corner, and a lot of times when I'm tracing shapes, I'll flip it to a stroke so it doesn't interfere with me being able to see the shape. I'm going to click where I think the curve ends and then click where I think it ends and just keep going. Click. Or you can also do that other option where you create a square, but see we have this little bit more of a complicated object here, so that's why I'm doing it by hand. If you just had a simple square without any complexities, then you could probably do what I did down there and use that rounded corner tool. Let's go ahead and switch that to a fill. Let's go ahead and sample that color. Looks like it's a gradient. We'll do gradients here in a bit. So now this one's simple. I'm just going to do the shortcut one and do a rectangle tool. And I'm going to do a stroke so I can kind of see. And I can make my stroke a little skinnier. So I'm down here in my stroke panel. I'm going to reduce it to a 0.5 points. So now I can kind of see the definitions of the line a little bit easier. Okay, so now I have my little rounded corner tool. I'm going to click and hold. And just like that, we created that shape. And I'm going to go ahead and get the eyedropper tool and sample that color. So this is the shape that we just created. Shift that over. We don't need the original. And you'll notice, you know, when you do the pen tool, sometimes it's not perfect. You're doing it by hand, sometimes it's not precise. So I notice right here, it seems to get a little bit skinnier, the stroke, and it doesn't look quite as smooth. And that's okay. We could select our object and get our direct selection tool so we could see where our anchor points lie. We can go and click on our anchor point and we can change this handle. Make it a little bit wider and make it fit a little better. Whenever you need more precision in a curve, and we'll probably get to this when we start tracing the more complex shapes, is sometimes it's nice to add an anchor point to give you more precise control. So right now I have an anchor point here, and I have an anchor point here. But I can go down to my pen tool and go down to add an anchor point. So let's say I want to add an anchor point right here in the middle. So now I was able to add more precision because now I have more anchor points to manipulate. So I can go to my direct selection tool and now I have this other point where I can be a little bit more precise. So sometimes when I have curves like that and I can't quite get the angle right, I will add an anchor point and give myself some more precision. And you can do the same thing. You can add anchor points to any point. So if I want to add an anchor point here, I can take my direct selection tool and make like an angle or something. Or make it an arrow. So you can add an anchor point to any point in your shape. You can even go ahead and use that curvature tool. So right down here, double click or shift. There we go. Make kind of a rounded cap. Let's go back to where we had it. I'm going to go ahead and take away those anchor points I added. I think our shape looks great. So there's shape number 2. So we have shape number 1, shape number 2, and I don't like the gap between. That's the original shape, so I'm just going to change that. I just used my keyboard tool to nudge it closer. So this is going to be a fairly simple shape since we've already done a lot of straight edges. This doesn't have any curves, so this will be really easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead, I think, let's do green. That's a different color. And let's do a stroke. So I'm going to do strokes with this so I can see where I'm at with my shapes. So that's 1. Okay, I'm going to go like this. 2. I'm going to continue to repeat this process for as long as I need to complete the shapes. And this could even be a copy and paste situation. Since these are all the same exact size, you could just simply do one point of the star and copy and paste it. So any way you can kind of streamline your process and make it quicker, go ahead and do it. We're just doing it manually just to practice. But you'll do that when you're doing logo design or symbols or UI elements, and you're kind of doing the same thing over and over. I love to copy and paste and rotate just to save myself some time. So now I've completed my shape. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the shape underneath. And so we're left with our strokes. And so you'll also notice with the strokes, if we were to leave them in a stroke, which could look kind of neat, you notice how you have this really kind of sharp pointed edges at the top. I don't like that at all. So we're going to go to our stroke panel, we're going to highlight our shape, go to our stroke panel, and I'll zoom in so you can take a look. I'll bring my stroke panel out. And I am going to do a rounded join on the corner. And so you'll notice it kind of eliminates that extra sharp edge. So we could just go ahead and select all and then add that rounded corner. So we could change the color and make this like a light gray. And we have kind of a neat shape there. So we'll go ahead and leave it that way. I think that's kind of neat. We can always flip it to stroke or to fill, and we can kind of select every other one. So I'm just holding down Shift and selecting the objects I like. And I could do like a little bit of a lighter color to kind of give it a cool 3D effect. So I just clicked every other one, held down Shift, and changed the color right here in the fill. So there's our next shape. So now we have 3 shapes down. Let's go ahead and get our stroke panel back over here. Let's do our next shape. We're still not doing curves on this one, so this should be quick. So let's do this one quickly. Let's grab the shape tool or the pen tool. Go ahead and flip that to stroke so I can see my strokes. I'm just going to go ahead and do a rounded corner so I can go ahead and have those nice and rounded already. So I'm just tracing, making kind of a series of triangles. And this is how I'm going to kind of do a shortcut. So I'm going to select all 3 of these shapes, this is what I just created. I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm going to rotate it. So I'm going to go over here to rotate. I'm going to rotate this guy until he's over here. It's the same shape repeated, so any way we could streamline and speed up our design process, the better. Alright, so let's delete our original shape. And so we could probably clean up these lines a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of shift it down until I have them lined up a little better. You know, when you trace it, it's not always exact. Of course, there's smart guides, which I'll get to here shortly, that'll help you snap to certain points and make it easier. There's our shape. We can switch, make that a fill, and we can kind of see our empty gaps here. We just take our pen tool, our direct selection tool, and just kind of make some adjustments and make sure it has a nice flushed look. We can make just some adjustments here. All right, so now we could do maybe an every other one type situation. So let's select this one, and this one. That's every other one. I'm just going to do slightly lighter. And there's our little shape. Of course, you can make it fun colors if you'd like. But let's move on. This is going to be a challenge. It doesn't look like it'd be very hard, but there's a lot of little curves here that we have to work with. So anything to speed up our workflow. So here's one thing we can do. I see a lot of circles here. So let's just take our shapes tool. It's already done for us. Hold down Shift. We already have our circle here done. We don't have to sit there and do the pen tool with the circle, which can be actually harder than you think. You can copy and paste that, or you could do the little hold down the Alt key and drag and create a bunch of versions too of the same size. But this looks to be a slightly smaller size. So let me hold down Shift so I can adjust that circle. I'm just going to keep copying and pasting, creating these curves. So why sit there and trace curves with a pen tool when you already have these curves done for you in the circle? So now what we do is we need to create this in-between connection. So this is where we are going to have to use our pen tool. So you're going to just click down here and click here, and I'm just going to hold down and go ahead and create our curve. Actually, I'm going to create it a little bit higher. There we go. This is why it's nice to have the stroke on, because you're not going to see that inside when it becomes a solid shape. All right. And I believe we could just copy and paste the shape. Oops. Select our little shape we just created. And we can rotate this. If I want to rotate it exactly 90 degrees, you can rotate it manually, or you can go to Object and Transform, and you'll be able to rotate it perfectly. So I want to rotate it at 90 degrees. Okay, so 90, click, and I rotate it. Now I can drag it down to this shape, and it should be the same shape. Although it's off a little bit, that's okay. They didn't do it perfectly with this logo, but that is okay. So I'm going to click here, and see this little handle? It's really hard to see with that orange. Really, really hard to see. You see the handle here? I'm just going to adjust that up to get the curve right. Same thing over here. I'm going to shift this over here and see if I can find, there's my handle. It's really hard to see. You can see it right there. I'm just going to adjust that. All right, so let's switch all these to a fill so we can kind of see what our final shape looks like. So we have 3 circles and we have our 2 connection points. And let's go ahead and switch all those to a fill. And let's go ahead and group them together because right now it's all separate little elements. So let's go ahead and select all of them, right click and group. And now we have a grouping, and let's go ahead and sample this beautiful gradient color. So we're just going to do the eyedropper tool. And you'll notice it'll do it for each shape. Instead of doing one nice smooth line, it'll repeat the gradient for each shape. So one way around this, and we'll get to gradients a little bit later, but go ahead and select your shape and grab that gradient tool, which is going to be right down here. I'm going to click and hold, and you're able to apply the gradient. Okay, so now I notice kind of some little inconsistencies, which I can easily kind of figure out. So I'm just going to shift these things around, get the right shape using those handles. If I need to add an anchor point to add more precision, I can do that. And also the shape builder tool is a really cool tool, which we're going to get to a little bit later. And it's how we can combine these objects into one object instead of having all these separate little objects. I'll show you a demonstration, but we'll do more in depth later. Let's see. I don't think oh, there's the shape builder tool. Good. It's on the layout version. So go ahead and click on the shape builder tool, which is right above the gradient tool right here. And what I can do is I can select all my objects. It's one big group now, right? So we selected all of our objects. Then we click on the shape builder tool. And you notice how when I hover over, it'll select certain objects. I'm just going to click and hold and just collect all of these objects into one shape. And it looks like I need to connect that little object. So now this is, instead of having 3 circles and 2 connection points, I now have one solid shape. So now I can come in here, and let's say I don't need that anchor point. It's like an extra anchor point that somehow got there. You could, just like you can add anchor points, you can delete them as well. If you hold down the pen tool, go to delete an anchor point, and let's say that's a redundant anchor point. It's causing kind of a strange kind of bend there. I'm going to remove that one, or let's see what happens if I remove that one. There we go. Now I can get my direct selection tool and kind of mess around with it a little bit more to get the right shape. Same thing down here. Let's see what we got. I could probably just shift that around. Okay. So it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good for now. We could spend another 20 minutes just fine-tuning those lines. But that is just one way to trace this logo or to create a logo like this. There's so many different ways you can tackle it. So I'm going to select the object below. So we have different layers here. So just like in Photoshop, you have a layering system. So if you switch over to layers, it works just like Photoshop, where you can drag and drop different layers on top of each other. But for this case, I want to select the object below. So I'm going to get that one and get rid of it. So I want this to be on the top. And we have that, oh, I guess that the original one also disappeared. Great. So now we have our little shape. That's what we created. There's nothing original left. Okay, so the heart. Let's go ahead and grab our pen tool and get started. So let's take our pen tool. I'm going to select down below. And so we have a very curvy curve, let's just say that. So we're not going to be able just to click up here and make a big curve because it's not going to get the angle that we need. So this is going to be something we're going to have to do lots of different anchor points and adjustments all the way around the heart shape. Let's go ahead and zoom in. This isn't so bad, so let's kind of click here and just do a small little curve. And let's change this color to make it really a different color. And let's switch it to stroke so we can kind of see our strokes. And I'm going to go down to stroke, or right here, my stroke panel, and reduce the thickness so I can have more precision. So instead of just going up here and trying to get this to match, I'm going to do small incremental curves. So maybe right here, just do a little curve along the way. And click back on here. Okay. So if I go ahead and click and I don't click back on that anchor point I just created, it'll give you a chance to make a curve. But if I click back on the anchor point I just created, it'll go back to giving you a straight option. So let me go back and do that because I like to kind of go with the curve. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. And I'm not going to click back on the original anchor point, and it continues that curve shape. I'll click again, and it goes back to straight. Create your curve. I might be able to get away with going all the way over here. So you notice we have, what, about 5 or 6 anchor points that helped us make that curve. Let's keep going, and you'll learn as you practice how many anchor points you think you'll need for each shape. I'm going to do trace the whole outline and do this little shape on top. I just like having, if you ever create outlines when we get into typography, I'll create an outline on a letter. And you'll see how many anchor points are being used in curvy letters. And I'll actually do that right now to show you a quick example. So I'm just digging in the type tool, which we'll get to in a little bit. I'm just going to create a simple B. I don't have an option to make that thicker. I'm just going to right click and I'm creating outlines. And what creating outlines does is it creates all those little anchor points. So when I go to the direct selection tool, you'll see how many anchor points it took to make the curve of the B. It didn't just take 2, it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you'll see some letters that have maybe 15 different anchor points to make a curve, just to make that curve really accurate. Let's make the little flat portion. I'm going to grab our pen tool again. I think we'll be able to divide this in half, so I'm going to click in the center and then go ahead and click and hold and then complete our shape and go ahead and flip to fill. And let's go ahead and delete the original object. Let's go ahead and make this a different color. Let's make this a fill. So I'm going to flip that to a fill. I'm going to make that a deep red color. Right? So there is our little object. We have one object on top of this one. So we're able to create a cool heart shape. Let's go down. I think we have one more shape left. Here's our other shape. So we're going to take our pen tool. I'm going to go ahead and click on the bottom and move my way around. It's going to do a complete outline of the shape. So this one has like a little bit of a curve. So let me grab a different color. So blue would be very different. Make it a stroke. I'm going to click around here and make a small. Okay. And this is good, even as someone who's done this for more than a decade. It's nice to be able to do these kind of projects to kind of keep my pen tool practice up. Because even I'm not perfect after all these years. So you see the little dent that's created, kind of like a little bit of an imperfection. We could just go in and fix that with the direct selection tool. We could go ahead and change our angles and our handles. Oops. And we also have our curvature tool if you want to have more precision over curves. So it's going to kind of help you out to make those curves too. So if you ever feel like there's kind of a dent like that was created, switch to the curvature tool and kind of play around and kind of help you create those curves a little better. So I'm just in the curvature tool and I'm just fine-tuning my curves. They don't look so dented, I guess would be a good way to describe it. So now I want to switch to the direct selection tool. Click here. I want to just adjust this handle a little bit and bring that down. So it just takes a little bit of noodling work. There's kind of our basic shape outline. And now it looks like we need to, let's go ahead and right click, and I'm going to ungroup this shape because this is one grouped shape. I'm going to right click and ungroup it and just kind of see how this is constructed. So that seems to just be a circle. Okay, that seems to be a shape. Let's go ahead and take this circle away. Let's just create this shape right now. So right now, if I were to switch this to a fill, you have just one solid object. You don't have the hole in the middle. Well, how do we make that hole in the middle? There's a couple things we can do. There's the shape builder tool, but there's also the pathfinder tool. And I'm going to do both so you can see which one you feel most comfortable with. The pathfinder tool is available on any version of Illustrator, and the shape builder tool is available from 2015 and beyond. If you've updated since 2015, you will have the shape builder tool option. So let's do the shape builder tool first. So I'm going to go ahead and create a circle. I'm going to create the shape in the middle. So now I have kind of our shape, but these are just two different shapes. They're not, I haven't punched the hole out of the big shape yet. So I'm going to select this center circle, and I'm also going to select this outer shape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this original so we don't get confused with what was there prior. So this is what we sketched, and this is the circle that I just created. Let's go ahead and select both objects. We're going to flip it to a fill. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a different color so you can kind of see the two separate objects. I'm going to grab that shape builder tool, which is down here. And I'm able to add objects together. So I can click and add that object in and create that one big object again. But I want to punch it out. So I want to remove the green section. So I'm going to hold down Option. And I get to see how it switched to a negative sign. That means I'm in subtraction mode. And so now I can subtract specific objects that are highlighted. So I can subtract that object, or even better yet, hold down Option and go ahead and remove the green. So now, if we go ahead and shift this back in, you can see it's totally punched out. You can see what's behind it. We have our shape. So now we need to create this this is what was there before. This is what we need to create now. Go ahead and arrange and bring that to the front layer. So we need to create the shape. Let me show you another way to cut that out. So let's go back. I showed you the shape builder tool. That was quick and easy. But just in case, just to give you another option, to flip those to fill, I'm going to bring out the Pathfinder tool. So I'm going to go to Window and bring out this window, Pathfinder. And it's right here. I'm going to drag it up here. So this will help you subtract and add particular objects together. Just like the shape builder tool did, but it's a little bit more precise. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these layers. And I believe I want to do exclude. That's it. So play around with these different options. I'll use them throughout the class so you can figure out which one's which and which one to use, but sometimes I'll experiment and I'll click on one. Oh, that's not it. So just kind of check it out. Through time, you'll learn which one each one does. There's divide, minus back. There's a few different ones. But in this case, I selected both and I went up to exclude. So it's going to exclude that centerpiece. And so now I accomplished the same goal. I personally like the shape builder tool because I think it's more friendly to use. But if you didn't have that as an option, the Pathfinder tool will do just what we just did with the shape builder tool. So great. So now we're back to where we were. We need to create the shape. So an easy way, instead of having to do the pen tool and do two different lines and then do fill and then do the shape builder tool to punch out a hole, I have a trick for this one. Since it's just a simple circle, I'm going to go ahead and create a circle. And let me make it a solid color. I'm going to switch it to stroke. Okay. And I'm going to change the thickness of the stroke until it matches the thickness here. I'm going to drag this about in the center. And I'm just going to adjust the weight. So I'm over here in the stroke panel. I'm going to just adjust it, make it really, really, really thick. And there we go. So now I have this wonderful shape created, and I didn't have to do any kind of Pathfinder or anything because it's a perfect circle. But see, when you have a stroke, sometimes when you make it larger, let's hold down Shift and drag to drag our circle perfectly. Notice how the stroke gets smaller when I make it bigger, and when I make it really small, the stroke gets thicker. How do we keep that stroke the same width no matter how we drag it? Well, we got to outline this path. So this is a path. Go ahead and click this little red line. This is a path, which is a series of anchor points. We're going to go to Object, Path. We're going to go to Outline Stroke. And what this does, it outlines the path. So now it is no longer a path that has the little manipulable anchor points. It's now a shape. So I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. So now when I make it larger, once you outline a path, I can't change the stroke anymore. I can add a stroke to it, but it's going to do around it as opposed to making it thicker. Okay, so now that stroke is created, I'm going to take the eyedropper tool, sample our little gradient here, pop that over here to our shape. I'm going to go ahead and grab the gradient tool here, and I am going to kind of make some adjustments. Oops, not to the stroke, but to the fill. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and select our little donut on the inside. Click our gradient tool. We'll be able to change kind of the thickness of it. There we go. Just making some small adjustments. We'll go ahead and delete the original. And there we go. There's our little shape. So we created all these different shapes by practicing the pen tool. So if you can create these shapes and you get comfortable creating these shapes, you can create anything imaginable in Illustrator. If you just master the pen tool, the curvature tool, which is a part of the pen tool. So if you master these two right here, use shapes whenever possible to save time, and then manipulate that using the pen tool and the curvature tool. And also using that shape builder tool and the pathfinder tools to punch out those shapes out of objects. So you don't have one big object, you could put shapes within objects. So if you kind of master those tools, you can create any shape imaginable. And so next we're going to create a couple of small icons. And we're going to play around with what we learned today to create some real world icons that we can use for a website we're going to design later on in the course. For our first mini project, we're going to develop a series of icons that we can use on a website and a mobile app. And I wanted to do this because I think we can learn a lot of the tools and even further learn the tools that we just went over by doing projects and kind of showing you how these tools work in a real world application. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one, I want to have really clean, simple icons with nice, bold, thick lines and a flat style of design. So super simple. The icon needs to be visible when you zoom out. So it's got to be an icon that doesn't have super duper thin lines. It could be easily read at only 25 by 25 pixels in size. So we really need these icons to be very simple, powerful, and bold. So that's kind of the idea behind these and behind these series of icons. And the future of design is digital. So learning how to do these digital oriented projects, especially when it comes to web app design and website design, you need to learn how to do these kind of icons and different graphics for the web. So let's go ahead and get started with the search icon. I like to use real photos as a reference because it just really helps me get an idea of what that shape looks like in real life, so I can be able to simplify that even further. So I'm going to use this real photo, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the ellipse tool. Go ahead and hold down Shift to make my little circle. Go ahead and bring that over here. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just getting a general idea of what we want the icon to look like. Let's go ahead and bold our stroke a little bit. So I'm over here. I'm going to bold it quite a bit. I want to make it fairly thick so that you can see it when it's really, really tiny. Now I have a good idea of the shape of the handle that I maybe want to emulate a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab. We can always trace with a pen tool, or we can create a series of shapes and join them together. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to get the rounded rectangle tool, which if you do not see it on your default panel, there's these little 3 dots at the very bottom of your toolbar. It says Edit Toolbar. Go ahead and click on that, and there's many more tools available that you can drag over here and swap out for tools maybe you don't use. So what I did is I went down here. Let me see my shapes. There's my shapes, and I was able to click on it and drag it onto the toolbar. So if you ever see a tool that I'm working with that's not there by default because we did the default layout workspace when we first started, and you don't see it, just go to these 3 little dots and you'll be able to pull up any of the tools I talk about. You'll be able to drag them over. So this shape tool, I can drag it over here, and if I don't want it, I just drag it back. And you can build the toolbar how you like it. There's probably some tools I might even drag out because I want to simplify my workspace so that less icons we have, the better. So I just wanted to kind of go over that real quick. So let's go ahead and grab the rounded rectangle tool, and this is automatically going to have the rounded corners, so I don't have to do that manually. Let's kind of reduce the stroke so I can see my shape a little better. And I'm just going to create a couple of these to kind of get that shape. I'm going to go up to shape, and so this already has the rounded corners on it by going up to shape, but it's too much. Let's kind of reduce the amount of curves. Let's make it less of a curve. So we're just going to cut this in half So now it's 0.4, let's do 0.2, and I have them linked, so they're all going to change at the same time. So enter, and it's going to have less curves going on there. I'm going to continue to create different shapes, and I might even switch to fill at this point, so I can kind of see how my shape is looking. So I could do another little shape here, another one here, and maybe with the pen tool we can draw a little bit of details here. We're going to take our pen tool and we're just going to draw a little custom shape. Oops, let me go ahead and make this a different color so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Let's click up here. It's going to make a little bit of a curve. Click up here, make a little bit of a curve. And now I could take the eyedropper tool and sample the red. And right now I have all these little elements, but I want to join them together, but I also want to make them center. These aren't really center aligned, and let me make these all a different color so you can see what I'm talking about. So they're not all aligned, so how do I align those so they're all nice and even? I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift and select all of my items. I think there's 5 in total. And I'm going to go up here to my align. The align panel, you can find the align options up here at the top, or let me go ahead and get rid of that update. You can go over to your align panel and do it that way, and just do a simple horizontal align center. So when I click on this, everything's going to align perfectly. And so now I want to group my objects together, and now I'm going to align it to the top object, because now we have this aligned within each other. So let's select our grouped object. Let's go ahead and make that one color now. And now we're going to group it with our top object. So now we're going to go back over to our align panel and do a horizontal align center. And you could do the same thing. There's left alignment, there's right alignment, and there's center alignment. There's quite a bit of alignment options, which I'll use frequently throughout the class. So any of the tools I use, you're going to see a lot. So if you feel like, oh, I didn't quite master that tool, I don't feel comfortable with that tool, we're going to be reusing a lot of these tools over and over when we do these practical projects. So you're going to have lots of practice. So don't feel overwhelmed at any point with one particular tool. I'm just taking the direct selection tool and manipulating a couple of these objects. It's going to take my handle, and that might be too detailed of a handle. We'll see. We don't really need the photo reference anymore, so let's go ahead and delete it. So now it's all about finding the right balance with our icon. And so what I'd like to do when I develop icons is I like to zoom out every once in a while so I can kind of really get a good scope of how the object is going to look in real time. So this icon is probably going to be viewed probably around this size. So it's good to kind of zoom out to see if I can make out and define all of the major parts of this icon. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in and make this a lot thicker, this little object. So we could just kind of pull this out and make it just a little bit wider. Or we could hold down Shift on this corner and just make the entire object bigger. And then we could simply cut this object below. So what we could do is right click and ungroup these objects. So now that we just have this little bar selected, I'm going to drag it down. And since we have this on the shape, it's going to automatically, when I make it shorter, keep those curves the same. So I can make this handle shorter very easily without having to change the curves. So now I'm just kind of adjusting and trying to make this a little more simple of an icon, making sure everything's center aligned as I go along. And so we can now angle our little icon. And I think when it comes to a search icon, we might need to make this a pretty short handle, because when you have search icons on websites, they're usually put in square kind of boxes. So we really want to make sure this will fit well in a square box. So let's go ahead and angle it, see if we like it angled. We can mess with the color as well. So we can change the thickness of this outer line. We can add a little detail, perhaps make it look like a reflection. So I'm just drawing, I just did one point and another point with the pen tool. And so now I'm going to go down and add my, my rounded cap. See right here with the stroke tool, I did my rounded cap to get nice smooth caps. And I'm going to reduce the weight on this. I'm just trying to emulate reflection. So sometimes that's done with lines like this. So all I did was did the pen tool, drew a line, and then added my rounded cap. Okay, so that's one option. What I like to do when I do icon development or logo development or symbol development is I like to make what's called different iterations. And iterations is just a fancy word for another version, just to see, so I can compare several different ones and see which one I think works the best. So we're going to do just that. We're going to copy and paste. We're going to try a version without the reflection. And I think we're going to do like maybe a glass reflection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, I have the pen tool, the click and hold and make kind of a curvy shape across, just like this. And I'm going to keep going around my stroke, just like this, and make a complete shape. Let me make that a different color so you can kind of see what's happening. Okay, so that's the shape that we created. I want to send this behind everything. So I'm going to right click, arrange. I'm going to send it as the back layer. So I'm going to do this a lot throughout projects. So I'm going to be right-clicking objects, and I'm going to be arranging them. And there's shortcuts. Study some of these shortcuts, because some of them are really make it, instead of having to right-click and go through this process, you could do shortcuts. For now, I'm going to do a little bit of the long way so you guys can get comfortable with that and learn the shortcuts as you do more and more projects. But just be aware there's always shortcuts that you can do for almost anything in this program. So I'm going to go arrange, and I'm going to send backwards. Arrange, send to back. Now, if you send it to back, it'll send it all the way to the last layer. So that's another option we could do. Of course, the colors are not final at this point. We're just doing red so you can kind of see our shape. And we could do another variation where maybe it's upright. Okay. And maybe we don't have anything. There's kind of our different iterations. So one thing I want to do is I want to change the color. I don't like this red. That's not really going to go with the web design I have. So I'd like to do kind of a cool gradient with this too. So one thing we are going to have to do, anytime you add a gradient or you change the size up and down, and you have a shape that has a stroke to it, similar to this little circle here, we want to make sure that path is outlined so that when we make it bigger, it doesn't get smaller, and if we make it smaller, it doesn't get thick. So, similar to this when it happens, right? We want it to stay the same weight or thickness as we mess around with it. So one thing I am going to do is I'm going to select all three of our circles, go up to Object, Path, and Outline Stroke. So now that stroke is outlined and now it's a shape. We also want to make sure these little lines that we created, which are also strokes right now, we also need to outline the path on that. So let's go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. So now all of our strokes are outlined, so it's going to be really easy to swap out colors now. Since everything is a fill, there's no longer strokes on anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all, and there's actually a little color cheat I'm going to show you here in a minute. But I'm going to select all of these and make them kind of a bluish color for right now. I think eventually these will end up being a gradient. And let's make that a lighter color, because that's kind of a reflection happening. So we can zoom out and see if we like how some of these icons are going. So I'm going to show you that cool color changing shortcut right now. So we could do it like we did before. We select each object and we change the color. But what if we had 100 icons and we wanted to change the color on all of them? And not all of them had maybe 2 tones or 3 colors, and we don't want to select all of them and change them all to one color. So there's a really cool way where I can go to the select option. So select, go down to same, and go down to fill color. So what this is going to do is it's going to select everything with that fill color. So let me go back and make this just a different color. Make that purple, make that purple. So let's say I just want to change the handles. So I go ahead and highlight this color. I go to select, the same, and go to fill color, and it's going to select everything that is that color. So this really helps when you have a lot of different things on your art piece. So I did a map one time for a mall, and there was probably hundreds of small little colors, and they wanted to change the colors up for a new year. So instead of having to select each one of those colors and then changing them, I was able to just select one color, go down to fill and select them all and change all of the colors, the entire color scheme of that map within seconds. And that was a huge time saver. So if you ever want to select something specific across an entire artboard, just go to select, go to same. There's also appearance. You could select the same blending mode. We'll get into blending modes in a little bit. You could select strokes and fill, opacity. There's several different ways you can select objects that have a similar attribute. So let's finish up our first icon. I kind of like this two-tone look, but I need to make some quick adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these layers right here, or I could just drag and drop. Hold Shift to unselect that purple circle and make sure these are grouped so I have an easier time changing colors. So now I have this as one object and I have this as one object. So now I can click on these. I can right click, arrange, and I'm going to send it backward into the layering system. So now you can kind of see the two-toned look. So here's kind of how it looks zoomed out. And so another thing I want to do is go ahead and set my first artboard for my first icon. So artboards. So we're going to talk a little bit about artboards. So we're going to go to File, go down to Document Setup. So File, Document Setup, and you're going to see a little Edit Artboards option on Document Setup. So go ahead and click on Edit Artboards, and it's going to allow you to create different artboards. So by default, you have the one artboard, which you can then change the size of the artboard, and then you can create new ones. You can click up here to create a similar size, or you can just draw the kind of size that you'd like. We go ahead and draw a couple of artboards. So I'm going to draw this artboard and then create new. So new artboard. And these are going to be where all of our icons reside. And what's great about keeping our icons on these squares, not only does it help us design for the web, because they usually are going to be in a square format, because that's how you do the web development, is you work with square icons, but it's also going to be able to help us when we export our files as PNGs, because you can go to File and Export, and it's going to be able to export all of these as single PNGs, as opposed to having one icon or a big list of icons. This will be able to divide it up for you. So for example, if I wanted to have this icon, let's go ahead and make it, size it up. I can have this one as well, and once we develop our entire series, I think we'll probably end up doing 5 or 6 icons across here. We go to File, Export, and we'll talk about exporting a little bit later. I'm going to click on Use Artboards and then PNG. When I export that to the desktop, it'll be nice and cropped, which will be so nice when you're working with hundreds of icons or even just 10 of them. It just kind of simplifies the process. So you can see how it exported each one in its own artboard, its own PNG. So we're going to go ahead and start to set that up. So we set up 5. If we need to add 6, we can always go to Edit Artboards and set that up again. So let's get rid of this big artboard. We're going to go to Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and there should be a little close icon where I can close it out. Or you could just press the delete button and it went ahead and closed it out for us. So I think I'm going to go ahead and drag this off the artboard and work with this icon as the final. So I'm going to just resize it to where I think it would look the best, and we want to really maximize the space when you're doing an icon. So you don't want it to ever go over the edge and be cut off, but you really want to push it as far as you can to the edge. Now I'm going to switch this to a different color. I think what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and talk about gradients a little bit, because I think it would be really neat to do a slow gradient across this entire piece. So I'm going to select both of these objects, and I'm going to group these together as one big large object. And I'm going to copy and paste, and the only reason I'm doing this is I want to save all these little pieces just in case I want to edit it someday in the future. So I always like to copy and paste and shift it over in my artboard. So now I want to make it all one color, just to kind of see what we have. And now it's all grouped as one element. So now we're going to add a cool gradient to this icon. So now that we have it a single color, let's go over to our gradient tool, which is going to be right here in your toolbar. You're going to have different gradient types up here. So we're just going to do a linear gradient for now. So go ahead and click on there, and we're able to kind of adjust it. I'm just holding and adjusting. And this is the newest version of Illustrator, so it handles it just a little bit differently. In other versions, you'll see kind of a line where you can kind of change the direction. But with this, instead of a line, it just shows you a live preview, which is actually really nice and helpful, which is kind of a good development in this program. So I want to change the colors. I don't like this default gradient right here. So how do we do that? We go over to our gradient panel, which we should already have up in our panel area over here to the right. And we're able to change our points. So let's make them bright colors. So I'm going to double click on that. And right now it's just a grayscale. So it's just got one option here, which is white to gray. I'm going to go up here to this little sub menu right here. And we're going to switch this. Looks like you can't see it on the screen. Let me see if I can't drag it over so you can see. I'm going to click over, see gradient. You're going to click over to the small icon. And you're going to see CMYK or RGB. So CMYK is meant for printing projects. So you're going to be sending this to the printer, you're going to be screen printing it onto a t-shirt. RGB is going to be for digital, for web. That's what we're doing these icons for, so we're going to switch to RGB. So now we're able to kind of pick a color, or we can pick it right here. So you have swatches, which you can load in and set. So if you have a certain brand you're working with and they have certain color palettes, you can bring those swatches in. You can also use the eyedropper tool to sample a specific color, which is actually a new feature. I don't believe they had that before in past versions of Illustrator. So I'm going to go back and we're just going to do down here. You can also do the scale if you want to find the right color, but I want to do like a deep purple. Okay. I'm going to click on the other side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the eyedropper tool to sample that same purple. But I'm going to double click on it again. And I'm going to make it a little deeper and maybe a little bit more on the blue side. Almost like a jewel tone. And let's go ahead and you can also change kind of where a gradient falls. So if you change this little middle area, you'll have the transition between purple and blue be quicker. So then there's going to be more blue. And the opposite is true. And you can also add different points in your gradients to create way more complex gradients. So that's how you can create metal gradients as well, as you have lots of different points going from a highlight to a low light. So I'm going to make this a little bit more of a complicated gradient. I can always take the eyedropper tool and sample that bright purple. So now I have a purple to blue to purple to blue. So it's kind of got a little bit of a striped kind of look to it. Or let's say I don't like that. I just want a nice transition from one color to another. I could just delete this little portion by dragging it down. Just drag it down and it deletes it. So now I'm back to the single purple to blue color. So now I want to change the angle of it. So I'm going to go back over to my gradient tool, which is over here on the left, and I have a linear gradient on. And now I'm able to kind of change the direction of the angle by just clicking and holding and dragging. Let's say I want it to be right about here. You can also do other things. You have a radial gradient, so it's going to be kind of starting in the center and going out as opposed to linear. So now we were able to add a neat gradient effect to this icon. So I feel like we're done with this first icon. We can always add little finesses and details later. So let's say we want to add a nice realistic shadow behind this icon. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this object, so I can hold down Alt and drag, or I can just copy and paste. And I'm going to send this backward into the layering system. I'm going to first make it a different color so I can tell the difference between the layers. So I'm going to make it a super light gray. I'm switching over to my swatches panel, and I'm going to select this very, very light gray color right here. And I'm going to select this object, right click, and send that all the way to the back. So now it's all the way into the back of the layering system. And I'm going to position it where I think realistic lighting would be cast. So it's going to be a little bit more of an angle. So it's going to be kind of similar to this. And you may like this nice, flat, clean shadow, but I want to add a little bit of a blur effect. So it kind of has a little bit more of a realistic shadow. So I'm going to click on this icon in the back. I'm going to go up to Effect. I'm going to go down to Blur. And we're going to do what's called a Gaussian blur. So this is just going to blur everything a little bit. So you're going to do Gaussian, and make sure you click on Preview to kind of see if you think if it's too harsh or too little. You can go ahead and gauge that. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 7.4, and you notice it kind of casts a nice light shadow. Let's say, oh, that might be too much. How do I go back and change that effect? Well, let's say you can't undo for some reason. I want to go ahead and change that effect. We're going to open what's called the Appearance panel. And this is probably a panel you want to go ahead and permanently add over to the right. So I'm going to open up the Appearance panel. And this is going to show all of the effects that we applied. And all of the effects are up here. This is what we just applied. We just applied a Gaussian blur effect. So if you ever want to go back and change the settings on any of these, you just go to your Appearance panel and it's going to have them listed. So right here for Gaussian blur, I didn't want to blur it quite as much, so let's bring it down a notch. Click OK. Oh, I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and drag my Appearance panel over here. It doesn't matter where, I'm just kind of putting it over there for now because I feel like that's a panel we should probably have open for a while. So I'm going to reduce the gray color just even more to make it a more subtle shadow. So I'm just making it more white. And there we go. I think I'm pretty happy with that. We can export our icon to see if we like it, but let's go ahead and do our whole series and see how we can make all of these have a unifying look and look great on our new website. The next icon we're going to develop is one that's going to show a checkbox or a checklist. So we're going to kind of figure out how we're going to best be able to portray that. So I'm going to start off with a simple square rectangle tool shape. I'm just going to make kind of what I think of a list. I think of a piece of paper with some checkboxes on it and maybe some items. So we're going to create something very similar to that. So I'm just creating a very simple box. I'm going to flip that to a stroke. When I do icon design, I like to kind of do it in black and white sometimes because I can just take color out of it for a minute. So I'm just to switch to maybe a light gray or a black, just kind of a simple neutral color. So I want to make a nice thick lines because when I zoom out, those thin lines are just not going to work. We like nice bold lines with things that are going to be very small. So let's go to our stroke panel. Let's go ahead and bring that out for you. Let's increase the thickness, and it would be nice if all of our icons kind of had a similar thickness or lines to them. So maybe matching the thickness of that line. So maybe about like that. Maybe expanding this as high as we can go to maximize our little icon size, our little 50 by 50 pixel size or 100 by 100 pixels, whatever the web developer needs it in. Let's do a couple of checkboxes and list, basically making a list. So let's do the same thing. Let's grab a box. Got to hold down Shift so I can make a perfect square. And I'm going to make these a little thinner. So we'll see how many items. This is going to be a small icon, so we don't want to have too much detail. So let's just do 3 simple checkboxes. They're going to go down the side. This is just going to indicate a checkbox icon. Let's say it's for a quiz or to sign up for something. This will be the little icon they see to initiate that response. So what I did right here is I went ahead and selected all 3 icons. And let me go back to where I was. Let me just shift that off a little bit. So when it comes to alignment, I'm going to go ahead and select all 3 of my little boxes here. And I want to align these perfectly to the left. So I'm just going to go up here to my align options. Or I have an align panel open, so I can use it here as well. Doesn't matter which one you use. So I'm going to do a horizontal align left, and all of those will be nicely aligned. But I also want to have them aligned where the space here, and the space here, what if they're different? What if I want to have equal spacing here? Let's say this is off a little bit. I want that gap to be the same as that. So how do we do that? So I'm going to go ahead and select all of our objects. I'm going to make sure I'm left aligned. We've already done that. We're going to go down to Vertical, Distribute, Center. And it's going to go ahead and distribute the same space here that it is here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste and kind of show you this a little bit more so we can really go through alignment in more detail. So let's say it's up here. Make sure we're left aligned, and then I'm going to go down to Vertical, Distribute, Center. And you notice how all of them are changed. So I'm going to do a few more so you can kind of see this more in action. I use this a lot to make sure I have perfect alignment. Not just left and right alignment, but alignment between objects. Let's say these are all over the place. You know, just a mess. We want to make them all evenly distributed. So let's do our left alignment and then just go back to our Vertical, Distribute, Center, and now they're all perfectly aligned. And the same thing works the other way too. Let's say these boxes, I'm going to go take these boxes, object, I'm just rotating these 90 degrees, or you can manually rotate them. And I'm going to put these out of order. I want to make sure they're all lined up going across. I'm going to select all my objects. I'm going to make sure they're aligned at the bottom. So this is vertical align bottom, or you can do vertical align top. But the spacing between the boxes are not right. So I need to go down here to horizontal distribute center, and it's the same thing as what we did, but it just works for horizontal objects. So this is for vertical objects, and that's for horizontal. Play around with these. Sometimes I click the wrong one. I'm like, oh yeah, that's for vertical. So I still make that mistake. So just play around until you get the right alignment for those. So these are nice and aligned, and let me mess around with the thickness. It probably wouldn't hurt to add a little bit more thickness to there. So now maybe we could do like a little check mark on each box. So let's make a little check mark icon. So we're going to grab our pen tool and do it manually. I believe there's a symbol or an icon where we can just do it automatically, but we're going to do it manually so we can practice. So a check mark. There's a couple ways we can do this. So we could take the pen tool, just click and hold and do like a little shape and make like a really stylized check mark like that. Add a little thickness to it. Maybe round the caps and then round the corner here. So I just did kind of a round join on my stroke. That's kind of stylized. So maybe I don't want the caps, maybe like this, and then I can take the direct selection tool, maybe not have quite a bend there. Here. There's a little tool here we can go ahead and go over called the width tool. And so if you don't see that, you can add that to your toolbar. But I'm just going to quickly go over the width tool. It's not a tool I use a lot, but sometimes if you want to change the thickness in one area of a stroke but not across the entire stroke, you could just change one part of the thickness. So go ahead and mess around with the width tool. I'm going to go ahead and click this and drag, and I'm able to add a little thickness to the top here. Let's see if I can't do it here. So that it goes from like a thick stroke down to a little tinier stroke. Kind of gives it a little bit of a style. Make it skinnier here. So it doesn't look like it's the same width. It kind of gives it a style. There we go. So there's our little handmade one. We can also do it by tracing the shape ourselves. So let's say we want it very stylized like we were doing, but we just want to draw it. So I'm just taking the pen tool and drawing our own little check mark. Just doing a full complete shape. Let's go ahead and get our direct selection tool and kind of mess with our selections that we just made. All right, so let's make this small and make it green just so we can have some contrast. Make our little check boxes. I can copy and paste, or I can hold down Alt and drag. So now we want to put some lines or indications that would be text. So I'm just going to make a little fill box here. It would be 2 lines and then a short line to indicate a paragraph. Make sure those are the same thickness. And let's do our align panel. Let's do a left alignment and do a vertical distribute center so that the spacing here is the same here. Okay, great. And we can make this a light gray color. Do it a light gray color to add contrast. Drag this down and drag this down. So we can make sure all of these are the same by clicking all of those little paragraph indications and doing a left alignment. I use alignment a lot, so I'm going to use that a lot. So there's kind of our list icon. So now we just need to zoom out and see how it looks, how it translates when it's smaller. So might be able to reduce the thickness just a tad here. Let's go ahead and zoom out. That's probably the size that you'll see it. So we may need to simplify it a little bit more. But it depends. It depends on how small the icon is going to be. If it's going to be used in infographics, we might be able to get away with this complexity. So now we're going to apply some coloring so we can make sure these icons match and have a similar theme. So let's start applying our same gradient. So right now this is a path. So you see how it's path and it's not outlined yet. So when we apply, if we make it a little bit bigger, it gets really skinny. If we make it small, it gets really thick. So we need to go ahead and outline that path. So I'm going to go up to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, but once it's outlined, that's it. You won't be able to change the thickness of it very easily. So just kind of be ready for that, to be committed to that thickness. So same thing with these little squares. Let's go ahead and go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. So those are now objects instead of a path. And so I'm going to go ahead and select all. And let's go ahead and take the eyedropper tool. We'll be able to sample our gradient. And then let's go ahead and get our gradient tool and change the direction of it. So we can have it be purple then to blue, or we can have it be the other way. I kind of like it purple down to blue. I'm going to leave it at that. These are individual lines. If you want one to be changed shorter than the other, you have minute control over each one of these little objects that we selected. Not sure if we want to make those a different color to really bring out the check boxes. We can go to our swatches and make it a solid orange color, something that's really going to pop out. Maybe keep it a bright green. It's pretty dynamic. Just depends on the look we want to go for. So let's say we want to create some action icons. So for instance, there's an addition icon, there's a subtraction icon, something they're doing on the website where they're going to be interacting with something. So let's create a few icons that help the user kind of have a symbol for addition and subtraction of certain objects. So for example, I'm going to do a circle, and I'm going to apply a thickness to it. Let's do like a light gray, switch to stroke, and do kind of the same thickness as we were using with the tool over here, the icon over there. Make it a little more thick. And let's say I want to do an addition sign, so it'll be as simple as taking a rectangle tool, switching that to fill, and then I'm going to copy and paste that same rectangle tool, and I'm going to go to Object, and I want to make it, I can always rotate it, or I can do it perfectly by going to Transform Rotate, and I want to rotate this 90 degrees. So now I'll be able to make a perfect addition sign with these two objects. And what I want to do is I want to make sure they're aligned horizontally, but I also want to make sure they're aligned in other ways as too. So I'm going to do all the center alignments. So that's a perfect alignment, horizontal and vertical. So I just made kind of like a little addition little icon. Let's do a little iPhone icon to indicate maybe a cell phone number or to download a mobile app. Let's just do like a little iPhone or Android phone type outline. So now that we know some of these tools, this will start going a lot quicker. Let's go ahead and get our rounded rectangle tool. I'm just going to go ahead and create a rounded shape. This will be our phone. We can go up to shape and maybe reduce the size of the corners so it's not as dramatic. I'm just going to do that manually by cutting that in half. That's probably about the size. You can go ahead and look at a phone for a reference or bring up a photo of a phone so you can get some reference. Let's go ahead and draw a rectangle box on top. This is going to be our screen. We can make it a new phone and not have the button. Or we can do an older phone and have a little button icon down there. So let's do an older phone. Let's go ahead and grab just a circle. I'm just doing shapes at this point, not even working with the pen tool yet. So just like that, we have a little iPhone icon. But I want to make this punched out. So I want to put this icon on any colored background and not have this white shape here. I'm going to punch this white shape out. So for example, let's go ahead and I'm just doing this to show you an example. Let's do a red color, just sending this to the back, arrange, send to back. So right now I want that red to show through. I want this to not be a white thing. So how do we do that? Two things. We can do the Pathfinder tool. We could select our two white objects and group those together. And then we're going to select our object below, and we're going to punch it out. So we can go to Pathfinder. Let's see, do I have Pathfinder listed? Nope. So let's go to Window and find it. There it is, Pathfinder. And we can do, let's see if we can't do an exclude. There we go. We punched it out by just going to Pathfinder and doing the exclude option. Or you could do what I like to do. If you have the option available, do the shape builder tool, and then you can just hold down the option key. You're going to switch into subtraction mode. You'll see the little subtraction sign, and you're going to click once to delete the screen, and then you're going to delete the button. And so now we have our icon that's ready to go. We're going to go ahead and sample our gradient color we've been using. Go to the gradient tool and find the right gradient flow. And just like that, we have a little icon. So we can adapt some of these little things to indicate text on the phone. Maybe it's a chat. We could do bubbles. So that's like reading an article. Or I could do little chat bubbles. So let's go ahead and grab the rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to create a couple of text bubbles. Well, let's not make such a dramatic curve. So I'm going to go up to shape up here. Kind of reduce that a tad. Let's half that. Let's do a 0.5. So there's our little chat icon. We can even take our pen tool. This is where we finally grab our pen tool. I'm just going to create a little triangle, which is going to indicate our chat bubble. And I could take my direct selection tool and make it a smaller little chat bubble. And then all I'm going to do is go to Object, Group, or shortcut, right-click, Group. And I'm going to copy and paste this object, and I want to flip it around. So I'm going to go to Object, Transform, and I'm going to reflect it. So I'm just going to reflect it. Oops. That wasn't a true reflect. That's why. Let's change that to 90. Usually default it's by 90 degrees. You go ahead and apply your gradients to this as well. Or you can make that gray. Light gray. So you add a little more contrast to the piece. So that could indicate chatting, or make that a little bit bigger. It's more obvious. Remember, we got to make things as simple as possible with little small icons. And I'm going to make sure those are aligned left. So there's our little phone icon. We can also do a tablet. So let's say we do a tablet. We're going to make it a lot thicker, maybe about like an iPad Pro or something. It's going to be really thick. Change this. It's less thick. Let's do like a 0.06. Same thing, we're going to add a square screen. We're going to do like an iPad Pro and not have a bubble or a button. They got rid of the buttons. So there's like an iPad Pro. And you could grab our little icons here that indicate text, maybe an article. Maybe you could do a square that indicates a photo. And bring this down so we have the photo on the top like they're reading an article. Right? We're going to go ahead. We're going to do the same thing. We have this, let's go and make these really crazy colors. So we have this red object here, and we have our object here. We want to punch it out. We don't want to have that blue box. We want that to be transparent. So we're going to select both objects. I'm going to use the shape builder tool this time. I'm going to hold down Option key in Windows. I'll go ahead and put up what that is. I'm in subtraction mode. I'm just going to subtract the middle object and then go back and put our gradient back on this. Okay, to make this less busy, we can make this gray. So we don't have too many colored gradient things going on. You don't want to overwhelm people. Stretch this all the way across to look like they're reading an article. And just like that, we have a little tablet option. We can add a button if we want to make it an older tablet. So there's kind of our icons we created really quickly. Let's say we were ready to export our icons. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm personally going to make this decision. I just wanted to show you the drop shadow, but I'm personally going to remove that because I really want to keep this flat design. And flat design is when you don't really add a whole lot of shadows. And if you do, they're flat. They're not blurred like that. So I'm just going to keep them really simple. I just wanted to really show you how to do that. So I think I'm going to make the decision that these are nice and clean over here because I use gray. Let's make this gray as well because I think this icon is just too busy with everything being a gradient. Let's go ahead and select all of these options. And click the gray, and that simplifies that list quite a bit. We can also make the squares gray. Oops, I need to zoom in on that one. 1, 2, 3, eyedropper tool, gray. Now you just see the checkbox marks. Isn't that much more clean? We might need to darken that a little bit, but we'll mess with that another time. Okay, so I'm ready to export these icons. I'm going to go ahead and save. And I'm going to go ahead and go to export. I'm going to export as. We're going to do what I showed you earlier, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So PNGs are great because they're going to have a transparent background. If you export as a JPEG, let me go ahead and bring up JPEG. If you export it as a JPEG, you'll have the white background connected with it. You won't be able to punch out that white background. So if you want to have the white parts of these artboards be transparent, which is what you're going to want, you could do a PNG. You just go ahead and make sure you click on artboards because it's going to export it and crop it according to the artboards. I'm going to export. I like to do high resolution, but with web, you want to make sure you keep your file size down. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 150 ppi. 300 is standard for print, but for web, it's 72. But with the invention of higher resolution screens, I don't mind pushing that number higher than 72 and doing like 150 to 300. So just work out with your web designer, whoever's going to be making this happen. Click OK. I'm just replacing the icons because I've already exported once. Here's all my digital icons. I'll go ahead and click on the PNGs. And they're all on transparent backgrounds, which is exactly what we wanted. So there you go. We just developed an entire icon set, and we'll be ready to do our next project. So now it's your turn to do a student project. I want you to develop an icon pack of your own. It could be a set of 3, 4, 5. You'd pick the number, but pick a certain kind of style, stick with it, and have fun creating icons. You can post it in the community section to get feedback from us or the Q&A section of the class. You can also post it on our Facebook group and get feedback from other students just like you. So have fun, good luck, and this could be a great portfolio piece. So for our first mini project to help us practice more of the tools we've learned, we're going to do a mini logo design project. And the focus of this one is to practice our gradients, but also to bring in something new called transparency modes, our blending modes. And so we're going to need to open up a new window. We have the ones that we've already set up, but we need to bring one more into the mix, and that's transparency. So just make sure you have that open. You go to Window, and you go down to Transparency, and you go ahead and make sure that is clicked to on. There we go. So we have our window open. We're just going to keep it available so we can be able to access it very easily. So I'm going to kind of reproduce kind of a dynamic, colorful, bright logo that involves 3 different oval shapes that overlap with each other and kind of show a little bit underneath of what's behind the layer. So I'll just kind of do a little bit of an example. This is going to be a mini project. So we're going to go ahead and draw a simple circle. Doesn't have to be perfect, so I'm not holding shift, I'm just kind of making a circle. We're going to go ahead and make that, go ahead and delete a fill and just flip it to a solid shape so it doesn't have a stroke to it. And we're going to apply a simple gradient. So we're going to go ahead and get our gradient panel out. So I went ahead and clicked on linear, so we're just going to do linear for right now. But I wanted to show you something really neat. So this is linear. This is what we've been doing throughout the course. But there's this new option available, and if you don't see this option, you might not have the most up-to-date. I'm using Adobe Illustrator CC 2019, and it's brand new to this year. So 2019, if you have anything prior or you have not updated yet, you will not see this feature. So this is a really neat feature because you're able to set different points. It's very simple to a gradient mesh, which we'll get to also in a little bit, where you can have different points and create a much more complicated gradient. Instead of a simple linear left to right, you can create almost like a gradient mesh where there's multiple points that you can change. So you can see how you can make some really neat kind of colors out of this. And you can hold this little icon down at the bottom, see the circle? You can click and drag to make that particular color whiter or shorter. So that one's white, so let's change that to yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight a few of these and click off of them. I'm going to go ahead and do a simple radial gradient just in case a few of you guys cannot upgrade to 2019 for whatever reason. I'm going to go ahead and click on radial, and that's this middle option. And so now I have a radial that goes from one color to the next. So now I'm going to go ahead and pick my colors. I'm going to go ahead and switch to RGB mode. And I'm just going to pick some bright colors within the same color palette. So I like this color, so I'm just going to click right next to it, and it's going to have a similar color swatch. I'm going to pull down on this black. I don't need the black anymore. I'm going to drag this all the way over. I'm going to be able to double click and make this within the same family. Just make it a little darker. And you could do the eyedropper tool if you want to sample. So that's all we're going to do, and now I'm going to make kind of an interesting shape. Instead of just a boring circle and a circle on top of a circle that overlaps, I'm going to make a dynamic shape. So right now you could do a couple of things. We can go to the curvature tool. We can kind of push this out in different ways to make it more dynamic of a shape. We can also add anchor points. So let's go ahead and add like an anchor point or two. And I'm going to switch back to that curvature tool. Anytime I'm working with curves, the curvature tool is my best friend. So I'm just trying to make a dynamic little shape here. A little different than an oval. It's got some different bends and curves. There's my little dynamic shape. What I'm going to do now, there's my purple one. I'm going to make two other colors, and I'm going to start to overlap them, and we're going to discuss the transparency window, which will be our different blending modes. So let's do our next shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it really easy on me. I'm going to copy and paste this shape, and I'm going to go ahead and modify. Go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. Modify my edges with the curvature tool to get kind of a different shape, because this will be overlapping the other shape. You'll see at the end kind of what we're going for, and I'll show you. I showed you at the beginning kind of what the final result was, so you get an idea of the effect and the style that we're going for. I'm going to make these about the same size. I think those would look cool overlapped with each other. Let's make this a totally different color. So we have purple. Let's try some warm tones. So let's go ahead and double click this. Let me go ahead and grab my slider here. We could try pinks. We could try, I like that color. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that down, or actually I think I need to double click that and get a second point, and then I can get rid of that one. And I'm going to drag this over, and I'm just going to reduce the brightness slightly on all three sliders to get a little bit of a darker color. I might want more of an orange. Let me drag this up so you can kind of see my entire window. There we go. Let's do an orange. So I'm going to double click on this one and go to a darker or a lighter orange. That's kind of my orange pop of color. I'm going to copy and paste and do one more shape. So I'm going to mess with the curvature tool and get different shapes on this one. I'm just going to get, I think the blue will overlap with the purple a little better. You can get your eyedropper tool, sample the blue, and then make it darker. Similar to that. Okay, so now I'm going to overlap all three of these circles, and they can interact in a special way by letting certain pixels behind the certain object through. And that's the whole point of transparency window and the transparency modes. So I can select all three, and you have your opacity, which is how you adjust the transparency of a particular layer. So if you want to reduce the opacity, or in this case the transparency, and then have it be nothing, you could reduce it to 0. Or if you want it full max capacity where you can't see, there is no transparency, set it at 100. Or you could do something in between. So that's kind of how you adjust the transparency layer of any object. But then you have blending modes, and this is extra special. So I'm going to go ahead and overlap a couple of these. And right now they're totally covering each other up, but we're going to change the blending mode so that certain pixels are going to be allowed to shine through behind objects. So we're going to select all of these, and we're going to play around with a few of these to find out the one we think looks best. So let's go ahead and try overlay first. So you'll notice how they almost create different colors as they go behind the other color. So this purple is allowing some of that orange behind it, and it actually mixes to create pink. So you can kind of see this overlapping effect in action. So I'm just going to arrange the shapes where I think is going to be kind of pleasing how they overlap. So they're a little bit more balanced in shape. Okay, so let's play around with some more blending modes. We do soft light, hard light. Some of these I don't use often, and some I use all the time. I tend to use screen a lot. If you ever want to screen, it kind of makes it a little bit brighter or lighter when you use the screen blending mode. And you could do this with photography as well. So you probably did some things in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you could do transparency modes. Same thing for Illustrator. So soft light seems to be kind of nice. I think overlay is probably the one we're going to go for, but I'm going to cycle through some of these. I'm going to play around with this just a little bit to kind of find the right match, and I'll let you know what I decide to come up with. So here's what I came up with. I messed around with it for about 5 minutes. And so the blending mode I applied to all 3 layers is hard light at 100%. And I'll kind of show you the final gradients that I ended up mixing together. I had to tweak them a little bit to make them lighter and softer, so they kind of had a nice blended look when they were put together. So I'm just going to do Command Z and go back in history to go back to where I was. And we can make a little logo out of this as well, just for fun. So we're going to grab our type tool and go ahead and just do a simple B. It's going to be a logo for a company called Bearcroft. So we have a B, and I'm going to find a really thick font that I think would look really nice and white in the center. So I think I did my homework a little bit and went ahead and found a typeface that I thought would be nice and bold for this. And that's Baruch Grote. So I think I pronounced that right. Baruch Grote, perhaps. So do black, there's bold. All of these could work, but I'm just going to stick with a simple bold. I'm going to put it over top the logo. I'm going to go ahead and make it white to provide nice high contrast. Shrink it down a little bit. I can even add a drop shadow to this, but I kind of like a clean, bold look. And you know, since this is a very soft logo, it's got nice, soft, playful colors. Perhaps it's for a children's toy company or it's for a media company. You know, we want to be kind of playful. And so capital letters tend to be very strong and professional, but lowercase tends to be nice, soft and approachable. So perhaps we could do a lowercase b in this particular logo mark. So I'm going to scroll through and try to find one that I think looks really good as a lowercase. Avenir looks pretty good, and I have lots of different weights. So these are different font weights. I have light all the way down to bold, and then black and heavy is going to be your heaviest weight. So we might be able to get away with just bold. That might be too overwhelming. So let's stick with the bold weight for that. And so now we could start to kind of pair a little bit of our typography. Let's play a little bit, kind of an introduction to how to work with type in Illustrator. So we can play around with some different type choices for our spelled out company name. So let's go ahead and spell it out. Bearcroft. It's kind of a made up company, I guess a media company. We're going to go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. And so if I'm going to do a lowercase b for the main symbol, I want to have some consistency with my type. So I'm going to also keep this lowercase and even keep it in the same typeface if possible, but it's not always a requirement. It's just nice to have some consistency with your main symbol font and your actual typography in your logo mark. So we can play around with some different layouts of this, but let's kind of play around with the coloring and kind of the presentation of this. So if I go to character up here in this character panel, or I believe I have a character panel right here in our main panels right here. Let me go ahead and slide transparency out of the way so that doesn't bother with us. And same thing with gradient. Let me go ahead and put gradient all the way down there just to kind of get it out of the way. So right here I can, if you do not see the character panel, go ahead and go to window and make that visible. But there's several different options. I can change the spacing between the characters. So that's going to be this option right here. It's called tracking. So I can change the spacing. I can make it a nice tight spacing, which could really work well with this. So I'm actually going to do a -50 spacing. So you notice how it's tight and it feels more concise, and I really like this little bit of a tighter spacing with this nice bold sans serif typeface. And so what I want to do now is with color. I don't want to add any more additional colors because I always I already have several different gradient colors happening in the logo, so let's do a nice neutral color. Black overpowers all the beautiful colors, so we need something soft. So I'm actually going to switch it to a dark to medium gray. And what that does is it takes the emphasis away from the name and kind of lets the eye look at the nice soft gradient colors. And I can even lighten that further. So I'm just double clicking my swatch and making it a little lighter. So now we can play around with what's called balance in a logo. So you never want to have the symbol be too large or the type be too large. These two elements need to work together and not overpower one another unless it's on purpose. So for example, if I have this really large B and a kind of a really small type, it's just the balance is off. It doesn't feel right. And the opposite is true. You can have this really beautiful logo, but this gigantic text, and it doesn't have any impact. And so how do we find the right balance? It's going to be testing it out with different iterations or different versions. And so that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to try to guess what I think would be a good balance, where both of them have equal weight. And so that's kind of my first attempt, but we can always just copy and paste this and continue to play around with ideas. There's also a way we can break up this word. Now, Bearcroft is a last name of the media company. Whoever founded this fake media company, that's their last name. So I thought it would be neat if instead of just saying one word Bearcroft, is we can lighten the text on the last half of the word and make it a little lighter gray to add contrast to that word. I can even make it darker or lighter. Let's make it lighter. Enough contrast we could see a little difference and it reads a little better. You see Bearcroft, it kind of helps divide the syllables in the name, Bearcroft. It just works that way. And I'll also have an iteration where I don't do that to see if I like it better as all solid coloring. Let's go ahead and copy and paste and continue to work on different balance options. So I make this a little bit smaller. We can also play around with, so this would be a vertical presentation. We can play around with making a horizontal presentation. And I am a big fan of making a horizontal and a vertical presentation of every logo I design. It should be able to be adaptable to websites, small square size profile pictures, but also very long headers and long banners. It needs to be very adaptable. So you always have a horizontal and a vertical presentation of every logo you do, as well as a black and white version. You should always have a black and white version, a full color version, a horizontal, and a vertical version. So that's what we have right here. So we can continue to play with horizontal. Let's go ahead and make these a lot smaller. I'm going to play around a lot more with these. And so sometimes when you have this big overwhelming symbol, this big circular symbol, when you have a very square kind of rectangle object, what's kind of nice to do is add a dividing line. And dividing lines are great in the design world because it really helps people break down objects when they look at them. That's why you see big flyers that have lots of different sections of objects on the flyer. They use divider lines to divide everything so it doesn't feel overwhelming to the viewer. And the same thing goes for logo design. So I'm just doing kind of a simple vertical bar to see if that kind of helps break it down. And let me continue to mess around with the balance to make sure that symbol is large enough to be prominent but not overwhelm and totally eat up the attention. So that's an arrangement that we can do. So we're going to look back at all our different iterations. And I'm really liking the two-tone Bearcroft. I just feel like that's one more way I can divide the information for someone, to divide those syllables up for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and use that as my version. And we're going to get into grids here momentarily. We're going to be able to really size these up perfectly using grids. But I'm in the concepting stage. So when you concept something, sometimes you just need to get it done. You don't have to worry about grids and being perfect. You're just getting ideas out there. So you don't have to use grids at this point, but I use grids when I get down to that final version. I wanted to keep this short and sweet, so I'm going to do a few more things and then move on to grids so that we could move on to other mini projects. But I wanted to play around with the bee. We found a bee, but nothing is ever set. When you really start to work with the logo, you start to go, okay, now I want to challenge what font choice I made. Can I find an even better font choice? So that's exactly what we're going to do with this version. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it so I can compare it to the previous version here. And I'm going to go ahead and select my type and see if I can't find a better match. I like this, but you just never know what else is out there. So that was Avenir. So let's see what else we can find. And we could find a serif typeface. So that's a serif typeface where it has little serifs at the end. But the problem with serif typefaces when you have kind of a complex color profile like we do with ours is it does kind of add more complexity to something that's already complex. So that's why I originally went with a sans serif, which tends to be more clean. So just kind of going through kind of my brainstorming process with you. So I have a lot of different type choices. That's a slab serif. That's a wonderful slab serif, by the way, Archer. So if you have a chance to get Archer Pro or Archer, see, that looks lovely. That's a beautiful font, but it's not going to necessarily work with this one. Maybe for another project, but I really do enjoy that typeface. I should probably make a list of typefaces I enjoy using. That's a very interesting Anouk bold. I don't like the B per se, but I kind of like the interesting kind of angles that type has. Ooh, I really like this one. Very thick and bold. And I love the tight spacing. Remember, I went over to the character panel and I have a -50 spacing. And now that I changed the typeface, I can always go back and loosen the spacing a little bit. But I'm going to keep with the tight spacing. I think that works. So I'm not a huge fan of this B that dips down, but I love the rest of the type. But you know what? It's really easy to create outlines and be able to manipulate that now that we know the pen tool. So I think we're going to do that. But first things first, I notice there's some uneven spacing here. So you notice how there's spacing here. Go ahead and double click. Let's do red. There's spacing here. Let me make it a little bit transparent. Just my transparency. I'm just going to reduce the transparency. Okay, and I'm going to copy and paste this space. And there's some inconsistent spacing here. There's almost no spacing between there. And it's really nice to have consistent spacing. It's called kerning. So I'm gonna manually kern this. I'm just gonna move the letters individually till I feel like they have better even spacing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna highlight both of these letters. So you're gonna hold down your Option key. Just keep that held down, Option or your Alt key, depending on if you're on a Mac or Windows. So I'm holding down my Alt or Option key and I'm using the arrows, my left and right arrows, and I'm able to manually separate my highlighted characters. So I'm just going to highlight 2 at a time. What I'm doing is I'm manually kerning this to create more even spacing. And to really create the perfect manual spacing, you'd have each of these as an individual letter, and you would do it that way. But this is a lot quicker of a way to do some manual kerning. So I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to highlight what 2 characters I want to bring together or pull apart. I'm going to hold down Option or the Alt key and use my arrows. So just a little trick to help you out. So I like the spacing a little bit better there. And now I think I'm ready to create outlines and modify the B a little bit. So I'm going to always like to copy and paste before I create outlines, because once you create outlines, that's it. You won't be able to access the original font again. So I'm going to slide this over here. Oops. Just so I can have it. So now I'm ready to select both of these, and I'm going to right click and create outlines. So we're going to create outlines, so now we're going to be able to access those anchor points. I'm going to zoom in on this B, and I'm going to you could select the B and grab the direct selection tool. And I'm just going to take that anchor point and fix it to how I like it. Now it might be to the point where I need to just delete that one anchor point. There we go. And then just take the direct selection tool, and I can really modify. I can make this be whatever I want to make it. So if I don't like a particular angle, or if I want to add an angle, I can. So that kind of adds a little bit of a personality to the type. I can go ahead and drag and pull this little circle to create kind of a softer corner to that. I could do that to all of these. And what I'm doing is I'm making a unique typeface. It's no longer this typeface that it originally was, but it's now something that's unique to me. And it's not copyrighted when you modify it like this. When you create outlines and you start to modify it to become your own, this typeface is no longer copyrighted. So that's really important. Some of these typefaces you need to purchase, but at some point you can modify it beyond its original characteristics so that it becomes your own. But you got to modify it a good bit. And see, I don't like how, see the thickness between this point right here and this point right here, how it gets wider. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I can just go ahead and fix that. I can probably remove an anchor point, bring this out, and make sure that's the same thickness. I could probably spend quite a bit of time messing with this, but I wanted this to be a short project. I guess it's turning into a longer one. That's okay. We're going over some really good basics here. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just rounding out the corners on each one of these little letters. We're giving the characters a softer appearance by giving them nice little rounded edges like that. I'm also fixing anything I really don't like. So notice how we have the slant on the T there, and I added a slant on this B. So I kind of like how one slanted down and one slanted up. So we kind of created our own kind of cool typeface. And oh, if I fix this arm on the character, it's called arm coming out to the right, I want to fix the other one. So that could be as simple as going and getting the direct selection tool, copying and pasting, and just going ahead and replacing it. And then getting the eyedropper tool. And we no longer need the one below, so let me go ahead and get the direct selection tool, and see you later. So now we can replace the B with our own little custom B and make it white and a little bigger to add contrast so it's not competing with the black B, so it's its own bigger B. We can even add maybe a drop shadow. I hate to add drop shadows, but sometimes it adds a nice effect. You can always remove it for some other versions. So I'm going to go to Effect. I'm going to go down to Stylize, and then I'm going to click on Drop Shadow. So I have my Drop Shadow window open. I'm going to click on Preview, and so you could do quite a wide variety of shadows. So we can change the distance. So let's make it a much closer distance. So if you kind of accidentally close your window and you want to be able to access any of your effects that you've done, remember we go to Appearance. So let's go ahead and open up our Appearance window, drag that out. So there's the drop shadow. Let's double click it, and now we can edit it. I don't want so much blur, and I don't want so much distance, so I'm just closing the gap there. Preview. And I like a nice light. Whenever I do drop shadows, I never do them too at 100% opacity. I always do it a very, very light opacity. I want it to barely be shown. That's how drop shadows are doing these days. You don't do those super dark shadows anymore. It's just not the thing to do, unless there's a particular situation where you really want something to pop out. So I'm just doing a very light shadow, clicking OK. So it just adds a little bit of dimension to the B. So there's our little logo and how it's kind of coming together. So now we can go back, now that we defined everything. I'm going to go ahead and put my versions together. So now we're no longer using that type, but I kind of like these particular versions. I like kind of the line. So we're just going to copy and paste. And notice the spacing here. It's pretty tight, but it's not so tight that it almost feels like it wants to touch it. So there's enough spacing here, but it also doesn't feel disconnected. See, that feels disconnected. That feels just too tight and makes me anxious. And this makes me feel just right. So here's our final versions put together for our logo. We did this logo, I guess this was about 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, that we've kind of been able to put this together. We're just playing around with gradients and also blending modes to get kind of a neat overlapping effect. So this is how the final logo looks. and I hopefully you enjoyed this mini project. We have a couple more coming up so we can continue to practice some logo design work. And one last thing I did decide after a few minutes of playing around with this, I did decide to change the angle to go downward because it felt more soft and less aggressive than it starting up high and slanting to the right. So what I did is I drew a line here on the T. So you see the kind of the T here, and I matched the same angle going down. I actually did decide to match it because I felt a little bit better about that. So one more thing I wanted to do is I wanted to apply grids to this so I can make sure I have some right alignment of all my elements. So to be able to switch on grids, you're going to go down to View, and you're going to go all the way down to Show Grids, and you see the little shortcut. I'm going to be toggling the shortcut back and forth, but you ever want to be able to just go to View and do Show Grid because you can't remember the shortcut, just go down to View, Show Grid, and go ahead and memorize that shortcut. So the Command and the quotation key. So I'm just going to toggle that back and forth very easily throughout the rest of this class. So I'm going to go ahead and line up everything. I'm going to line up my typography first. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to line it up on a corner and have it expand all the way over to the edge of any line, just as long as it kind of goes across a certain amount of boxes. So you notice how that's aligned and that's aligned. And now what I'm going to do is this entire shape, I'm going to try to put the same boxes on the left that there is on the right. So let's say 3 spaces, and then that's 3 spaces. So it's really going to be 2.5 if that's going to be an exact middle. So somehow in the half of that box, and then the half of this box. I'm just trying to find the right center point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down so that this is down at the line. See there at the line, I'm just aligning it just a little bit so it's lined up that way. And so I feel like that's pretty close. Let's go ahead and toggle our grid back on. We're going to do the horizontal version. So I'm just going to kind of put that over there. I'm going to do the type first. I'm going to put this at the bottom and to the left. And then with this area, I want to make sure there's the same boxes here as there is down at the bottom. So I'm just going to size this up. So we have 2 boxes here and 2 boxes here, and maybe 1 box in between the 2 objects. And you can align things on the grid perfectly, but then there's just the designer's eye. And sometimes you have to do optical adjustments and go, okay, that spacing's too tight, let me nudge it up just a tad. That spacing might be too tight, let's nudge it up a tad. So there's going to be, not everything has to be perfect on the grid. It just helps you with finding alignment with your type. So for our next mini logo project, we're going to do this one right here. Instead of adapting a character from a typeface, we're going to be able to create our own letter P, just from using a combination of shapes and the Shape Builder tool or Pathfinder tool to be able to create this kind of 3D overlapping effect. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool. It's going to create our stem of our letter P. And I'm going to reduce the amount of curvature of that P. I'm just going to cut this in half. Instead of 1, I'm going to do 0.05. I'm going to make sure all those are locked too, so that all 4 corners are rounded. So now we need to get the circle for our P. So we're just going to draw a simple circle. Go ahead and place it where I think it would have good balance. Okay, so now we need the center of our P. So we're just going to draw another shape, and this is going to be white. I'm just going to drag it here. I want to get some nice even thickness with our type. I'm going to make this a different color so we can see where the stem is. There we go. And notice how the thickness here is not the same as here. We're going to do the align panel over here, and we're going to be able to fix that issue. So I'm going to go over to my align panel and do a horizontal align center. I'm also going to go around and do a vertical align center. So you notice the small adjustments it made. Horizontal distribute center, and I'm going to go ahead and do a vertical distribute center. So I'm just going around, I'm doing the center alignment on all 4 of these categories. And so now these 2 circles are perfectly aligned with each other. So if I'm happy with the thickness, let me go ahead and go back and look. I think I want to make it a little bit thicker. I think I had it a little bit thicker. The line, and so I'm going to go back and just click on all the horizontal and the vertical distribute center. I'm going to select both of these and I want to punch that white part out. So I'm going to simply go to the shape builder tool, hold down Option or Alt, and go ahead and punch that out. So now that's transparent behind it. So now we want to create the cool 3D effect where it looked like it was spinning on top of each other. So this is how I get the cool 3D cutout effect. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and make a circle. So I'm going to make a circle where I think I can cut it out using the Pathfinder tool, or in this case, the Shape Builder tool, to find the right shape to make that curve. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw a circle, and once I do this, you'll be able to see why I chose the place where I chose. So I want to choose kind of the curve, see the blue outline. I want it to kind of cut through that section right there. Go ahead and make this red. Flip that to stroke and make that a small stroke so I can see. So I want to be able to get this portion. So anything with the Pathfinder tool, if I have overlapping shapes, I can create any of these shapes by punching or adding to it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the circle and copy my little circle that makes the loop of the P. I'm just going to paste it over here. I'm going to make this a solid shape. I'm going to send that to the back just so I can see what's going on. I'm going to select both objects and grab the Pathfinder tool. So this is the shape I'm after right here, this little half moon shape. So that means I can go ahead and hold down Option or Alt and get rid of anything I don't need. And so just like that, I was able to make this curve. I could do the same effect by tracing the same shape with a pen tool, but I find this better because I can get a really accurate curve of that P. See this curve right here? That's sometimes a challenge with a pen tool. So any way you can make it easy on yourself, please do so. So I'm going to make this lighter so you can kind of see the shape that I created. And so what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to make this a gradient. I'm going to make this a gradient from keeping that light and then fading into this very same color. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a little bit more space around here so I can fade it properly. So I'm going to create that right now. I'm just going to grab the pen tool, and all I'm going to do is kind of give myself a little more room to fade the gradient. That's going to help it blend into this other half of the P. And it's a little hard to explain now, but once you kind of see it in action, you'll be able to understand why I did all this. I'm going to go down here and kind of fix any imperfections. You can always fix them later too, that's a great thing. And this is going to be faded out, so that's not going to matter as much. Okay, so I'm going to add this shape and this shape. I'm going to add them together with the Shape Builder tool. Could hold down Option or Alt, and I'm going to drag and include all those together. And now they should be one shape. Hold on. I want those 2 objects together. I didn't want to select this part. So now I have this as one big object. And let me just smooth this little point out. And I bet I can get my curvature tool and make that happen. Just like that. Now I'm ready to do my fading and add my gradient. So I can go over here and just do a linear gradient and go ahead and grab our gradient tool so we can get the angle we want. We want to go from light up the top to dark. We want this to end up blending in. So we're going to try to find the right, actually that works out really well. So we want to make sure it doesn't look like you can see the end of the shape, that this is the same color at the end of this shape gradient that is the circle. So you see how those blended together. So now we can fine tune our colors a little bit and also add some shading. So we can make this even a particular color, so we can make it a green. We can even apply a gradient to this. But let's kind of keep it the black and white. So we're just going to do kind of a lighter gray. And I also want to add a shadow just to give it that 3D effect. So this is casting a shadow down here, this little circle part of the character. So I'm going to do that manually with the pen tool. think I'm going to grab these two shapes here. So our circle and our little circle that added the 3D effect, shift that over just a tad. Okay, so I'm just going to go from the top all the way to the bottom, make a curve. And that's going to be covered up by the loop of the P, so don't worry about that so much. I'm just creating a thick portion that will act as a little bit of a shadow that's cast from the top of the P. So I'm just making sure my shadow has similar thickness. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. So I'm going to take the eyedropper tool and sample this gray, and I'm just going to go down a little bit darker. I don't want the shadow to be too dark that it looks fake. I want it to blend in nicely, just be a nice subtle touch, just like that. Now I'm going to go back and just fine tune my little selections and maybe not make it quite as thick. We just want a thin shadow to be cast. We want the angle to be right. So there's our P. We can apply text to this. So this is going to be Parsons. So Parsons. Parsons Dynamic, or I guess we can just call it Parson Dynamic. Kind of a made-up company, kind of a tech company. But we want to be able to balance the text out. So we're going to work with typography next to try to find a font or a typeface that will work really well with our little 3D P symbol. So I'm going to find a typeface I think will work really well. There's one I've already kind of researched, but I'm going to try a couple other ones. I don't want anything too specific because we already have that detailed P, similar to a logo I did in the past, the Bearcroft logo, where we had such a strong little symbol that we don't want to have a typeface that takes away from that. So we have this really intricate P. So let's do something simple. Let's do a Azo Sans Black. So this is just like a really simple font. We can even do a lowercase because we want to match the lowercase of the P here. And then we can copy and paste. We need to do a second part of our name, which is going to be Dynamics. And what I like to do is I like to pair a very strong first word with a much lighter weighted and thickness of the second word. So in this case, Dynamics. And so one way we can do that is by changing the weight. So let's find another font that has a wide variety of weights. And I know offhand that Railway has a wide variety of weights, including a thin. But here's all the weights available to me. So I have really thick to really thin. And I actually want to do a light because thin might be so light that it's not going to print really well. So let's go ahead and stick with light. And so now I want to balance this tight spacing. And I might even want to tighten the spacing more. So let's go to our character panel. Let's tighten the spacing or the tracking, just like we did with the previous logo. Let's do a -25 there. And with this, we're going to do wide tracking. It's all about contrast. So if you have one letter that's really tight spacing, try the next one wide spacing. Anything to add contrast to your logo. So let's do some dramatic spacing. Let's do 555. Let's put that here. And we can even do this uppercase. This would be Parson. We can lighten this so we can match this gray color. Let's go ahead and put our character panel back over here. So now this is where we really play with this spacing. So I'm back over to the character panel. Let's do widen it even more. Let's do 888. And I'm going to make sure I'm flush. You don't have to do this, but this is kind of the look I'm going for, where the N and the S at the end match with the P and the D. They both are flush with each other. You can always do it where, you know, this bottom one, there's a little bit of a smaller portion, and that works really well when you have a center alignment. But when you have such strong left, right, horizontal appearances, sometimes it's nice to have this flushed block look with your text. So now arrangement and also balance. We don't want the P to overwhelm the Parsons or the Dynamics. So we're going to go ahead and group this P together and go ahead and group our characters together. And let's play around with sizing and spacing and orientation. I'm going to do exactly what I did with her previous logo and play around with horizontal presentation. And so we have to look about spacing and gaps in design. So right now there's this huge glaring gap right here, and it just seems a bit awkward. So we need to somehow close that gap or find a way to arrange the logo where that gap doesn't seem so empty. It just seems like it's creating so much negative space that's not adding to the design. So it could be a matter of just making the P smaller and adjusting the balance and maybe evening out that P. It could be a matter of adding that dividing line, kind of break those elements up. Oops. Just like that, making sure there's enough spacing between the line and the elements. You don't want anything to be too tight, like that's way too tight. That just makes me anxious, makes me nervous. Just having nice open white space. You cannot have enough. Well, I guess you can have too much. Well, that's too much, but just be very careful about having things too close to one another. It's a very common thing I see is people not having enough white space between and around elements. It's a huge deal. Okay, so that's kind of an arrangement. I think this P is probably too big, so we need to adjust the balance of our logo and make that a little smaller. Okay. And we can continue to play around with some different options. We're not final on the type choice, and once again, we can manipulate the font a little bit or the typeface to make it a little more custom. So one thing I do want to try is perhaps, let me go ahead and ungroup that element. Delete the P, and this is just, I'm just playing around. This is all part of the fun, all part of the concepting process here. To make this larger, I'm not sure why I'm making it larger. Let's keep it the same size. I'm going to copy and paste. What I'm trying to do is make this all one word so we don't have a separate logo mark and a typography element. We have them combined. I didn't know how that was going to work. And this is where popping into our grid, I'm going to do the shortcut for grid, which is Command and then the quotation mark. Of course, you can always go to View and then go to Hide Grid or Show Grid down here. And I'm going to line this up on the grid to kind of help me a little bit. So this is the baseline of the type wording here. That's the baseline. This is your top line. And both of those together make what's called your X height. The very bottom of your characters and the very top of your characters. So I want to make sure this is aligned with them. So I want to make sure the top of the P and the bottom of the P is on the same line as all the other characters. And this could be a case where we need to mess with the type choice. We need to make it our own because it may not work because this is so different than the rest of the characters. It's not working. So let me try shifting this down to this bottom line, seeing if it can't work as a capital letter. That does look a little bit better, but I'm not happy with the type choice. And when I do this, you have this very open gap. It's really too big and it looks awkward, doesn't it? You almost want to tuck this underneath. Just like this. But see, now you have a misbalanced logo. The P's overwhelming and this is just too small and it looks funky. So this is a case where you experiment and it doesn't work out. That is okay. But I just wanted to give it a try. The P, is this a hard letter? Some letters are easier. B is very balanced. The letter B, it's kind of similar on the left, similar to the right. With the P, you have this large gap, and that's the issue that I'm having here. But I'm feeling okay about the overall logo as it's going now, and I want to maybe experiment with adding color, because I think gray's fine if this is an industrial coating company, but what if we want to make it colorful and a little bit more modern? Let's just experiment with a try. So I'm just going to copy and paste, and we're going to do that next. So let's play with color. We're going to go over to gradient and maybe add a little bit of a dynamic color. So I'm going to go ahead and ungroup first and select our rounded area. And I'm going to go to gradient, and this is a brand new option only available in Adobe Illustrator 2019. So make sure you update, or if you have an older version, you can always just use the radial gradient or a linear gradient. But the great thing about the free form, go ahead and click on that, so I can do as many different points as I want. So I'm just going to double click and just do some simple orange tones, maybe start light and then work my way down. to darker. Oops. Okay. We have our little shape that we did a gradient, so I'm going to go ahead and click on here. And so you'll notice the opacity on this particular gradient is 0. So it's fading. So you have the top gradient, which is this color. Let's go ahead and change that to green so you can see that. So there's the green up top. And then you have it going to, it almost looks like no color. That's because we set the opacity to 0. If we were to set it to 100%, you'd see the color. But since we set it to opacity 0%, it fades into nothing. It fades into transparency, and that's how it's able to smooth out and look good. So remember that one is set to opacity 0. So if you wanted to do a transparency that seemed to blend or feather out, I'm going to do an example. I'm just going to do a box. So this is what we have here. We have, see how it's feathered, kind of a feathered effect, which this could be very useful in layout design if you want a particular color that fades into nothing. It doesn't fade into white, so if I would click this and go to opacity and do 100%, it fades into white, or in this case, let me change the color, yellow. But we can go and change the opacity of one side to 0, and it feathers into nothing, which is very, very useful to know. So you do that in the gradient panel. Okay, so let's change these colors because they're looking pretty ugly. So now I can go over here, try something like a yellow or a white or a purple. So we could do a yellow, and then we can take this and do the eyedropper tool. So let's edit our points. Let's do some cool blues. So we're just going to do some blues. And I kind of like this dynamic color going on here. This is really interesting. Let's make that a more of an orange. It's very similar to one of the other logos we did, where it's kind of a very modern thing to do, to kind of do this gradient mesh where you have warm tones and cool tones collide together. That's kind of the in thing, jewel tones and all sorts of vibrant tones coming together. So when you're in the concepting process, you're constantly challenging what you think you want to have happen to the logo, and you end up making mistakes and having happy accidents. And this is kind of where I ended up going with it. And the reason why earlier I wasn't able to kind of close that gap is I wasn't thinking, oh, I could put dynamics down there and kind of close that awkward gap that drop down P was making. So I was able to kind of fill that in with the other word. And I also went ahead and I softened all the corners of each letter, and I kind of changed the coloring to a more simple color palette instead of doing kind of the crazy multiple colors, which could look cool, but I was a little worried that it was almost too much. So I changed the colors. Of course, you can change it if the client doesn't want pink. That's a very easy change to make whatever color scheme I think that they would want, depending on what kind of company this is going to be. And so I just wanted to kind of show you how I ended up. And these are the final kind of versions of the logo. And we have this wonderful black and white version, which could be the one that ends up being selected by the client. I love to have simple black and white versions because sometimes when you mess with color too soon, it could confuse the client. Sometimes I like to send black and white concepts to them first, and then we can dive into color afterwards. Because when you send a color version, they'll go, oh, I don't like pink, or we didn't think purple would match our brand. So unless they already have a color palette developed or branding standards, sometimes it's great to go ahead and send them the black and white version. So if you're working with the client on this, they're going to go back and forth with you probably for a couple of different revisions and different tweaks, because you're going to be able to design the logo well, but they're going to have their own idea of what they want in their head. So in this case, this is kind of the logo that I thought would win out because it was bright and vibrant, and I even brought out a little bit of that element of the O in the circular part of the P. I also brought that out in the O so it can stand alone instead of having the P be its separate symbol. But in the end, this is the one that won out. Two different versions one that can work with the large P, but one that can be totally standalone and does not have to depend on a symbol for the logo to be recognized. So I think this was a smart choice on part of the client to get a really well-rounded adaptable logo. So you can see how we rounded the corners from the original typeface, and I've also added that same rounded effect that goes from dark to transparent on the O as well. So that added a little bit of consistency. So I'm going to just make a few more tweaks, and I think we're ready to be able to bring this to the client for final files. So if they've already approved, I'm just kind of messing with that. I want to make sure that comes down where the D is. And after I've paired it on the grid system and I've been able to kind of get the alignment properly, make sure the S goes all the way to the end of the N, and make sure these are all consistent and look very, very close or very, very ready to go, I'm going to talk about exporting files. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out of here. These are all of our other versions that we no longer need. I'm going to go ahead and slide all of these away. These are the two final versions they want. I'm going to go ahead and make this larger. And I'm going to go to File, Document Setup. I'm going to set up a couple of artboards. So I'm going to go to Edit Artboards. I'm going to set up a square for my vertical orientation. And I can click on New. This is going to be a new artboard. And this is going to be for my horizontal presentation of the logo. And what's great about setting up multiple artboards is when I export this, I'm exporting both files. I don't have to have a separate Illustrator file for each version. I have just one Illustrator file for the entire logo. I'm going to go ahead and save my file, and then I'm just going to go ahead and export. So we're going to talk about versions. So there's several different versions that the client's going to want and need, and the first one is going to be a vector version, which is the most important because that means if another designer was to ever inherit this brand, they'd be able to have all the anchor points and be able to change it, update it, refresh it, whatever. It's really great to have a vector version. So we're going to go to Save As for a vector version, and we're going to save it two different ways. And I always like to give clients more options because the more the merrier. They don't have to come back to you 3 years from now and go, hey, do you still have this file? They have everything they need. So I'm going to save it as an AI file. I'm just going to click on Save, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to pretend like I clicked on Save. But I'm also going to do an EPS. Both of these are valid vector files. So these are the files you're going to send off to the t-shirt printer, any large format printing like a banner. They're going to really, really want this nice high resolution vector version. So both of those I like to give to the client. I also like to export. So instead of going to Save As, I'm going to export. And this is going to be your PNGs and JPEGs. This is going to be what most of the employees are going to use. And PNG is going to be transparent background. So I'm going to export that. I'm going to use artboards so that it crops it to the artboard. And I'm going to do this at a pretty high PPI, which is resolution. The higher the better, because a lot of people like to use these PNGs and they blow it up to a large size and it looks really bad. So if I go ahead and save it as a high resolution file, they don't have that problem. It's super high resolution. They would really have to make it big to make it blurry. So that's just from experience and working with clients over the years, what they try to do with the files. So that's exporting. I wanted to show you what both of those look like. It's on a transparent background, so that gray indicates that it can be put on any background in some case. Okay, so export. So I did a PNG, but now I'm going to do my final one, which is JPEG. I'm going to do the same. This is going to be for the web, for social media. So I'm going to do a resolution of 150, but you could do 300 because most social media websites, they'll size down for you. So better to give them a higher resolution. They can always size down than having too small and them not being able to size up. So just to kind of go over the different file formats that I'm sending my client, I'm sending them the .ai file, which is the Illustrator file. And also I made sure I outlined the type. So when you have any live editable text, unless they have the font installed, which you can always send them a file of the font, so the typeface, so Railway, you would send that to them. Or you can click on any live text and right click and create outlines. So it's going to create outlines. I can't edit it anymore, but I can go and manipulate the anchor points. We want that when we export our files, because if they don't have that font installed and they try to open up this file, it's going to substitute another font. So right clicking, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll select all, and then I'll create outlines. So you can go to type, create outlines, or you can just right click. This is what I do, and then create outlines. So once you do that, you can go ahead and export those files, and all the type is outlined. You don't have to worry about live text and them not having that type installed. So there's all the different file formats. I had the 2 vectors, the EPS, the .ai. I also have the PNGs and the JPEGs. And that's pretty much it. I package that together in a zip file and I send it off to the printer, and then I send them my final invoice, which is of course my favorite part. So just when you think you're done with their logo, there's always just one more thing to do. So we sent them all the versions that are gray. That goes great on light backgrounds. But what if they wanted to apply their logo to a dark background? We definitely want to give them that ability. With every single logo we do, our logo should be able to go on a darker background. So we're going to go ahead and take our logo real quick, and we're going to go ahead and take this and convert it to white. So I'm just going to select some of these elements. I'm going to ungroup everything so I'll be able to have access to all these little pieces. Ungroup. And I'm going to go ahead and change them all to white. Okay, so we want to do that white, or we could do a light gray, but I'm just going to do a white. Actually, a light gray might look a little better. Let's do a little bit of a light gray. That looks really great on the purple. So now we're going to go back. We have 3 little places where we have the swirl, so we want to make sure all those are the same. I'm going to go ahead and click on gradient and see if it'll let me change both of them at the same time, but probably not. So we're going to go ahead and zoom in on the first one and do these one at a time to make sure these have a better contrast than what they have right now. Okay, so I clicked on gradient, and let's see if we can't make that a little bit of a darker contrast. The double click. We don't want it too much of a dark contrast, so maybe right there. We definitely, that's part of the branding, is that little swirl. So we want to make sure that's a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go through each one of these, make sure it's the same color. Okay, and I think I have one more up top. This one's very light. So we're going to go ahead and get our gradient going. Let's go ahead, and I think this was a linear gradient, so I'm just going to make that darker. And there we go. We have this adapted to a white background. That's too dark, so I'm going to make that much, much lighter. So now this works well. So it's now time to practice layout design. So we're going to go through a poster project using the brand that we just developed, this Parsons Dynamic logo. We're going to take this logo and color scheme and some of these branded elements to create a dynamic, no pun intended, poster. So the first thing we're going to do is go to open a new document in Illustrator. So I'm just going to do File, New. And this is 2019's version. I think they changed this in 2017. This is a brand new kind of interface, but if you have an older version, it may look a little different. But for a poster, I'm working in inches because I'm in the United States, but you can work in centimeters elsewhere. So I'm just going to do a standard, I'm going to do a flyer design that's going to be an 8.5 by 11. But I'm also going to leave this open where I can scale it higher if I want to make a 2 by 3 foot poster. But I could also scale it smaller and make it a social media graphic. So we're going to be able to make this one 8.5 by 11 inch flyer, and we'll be able to make all the sizes we need from this particular size. So I'm going to make this a print project, but I can also make it a digital project very easily by exporting it as a JPEG when I'm done. But I'm going to go ahead and add a bleed. And I have this locked so that when I press up, it's bleed added on all sides. So in this case, it's an 1/8 of an inch bleed. So 1 divided by 8 is 0.125. If I needed to do a 1/4 inch bleed, which is usually not required unless it's a large banner or something super big. The bigger you get, the more bleed that may be required. But this is a simple question to ask to your printer. How much bleed do I need? And they'll say, I need an 1/8 of an inch. So you would do an 1/8 of an inch all around. So you'll see the red line, which indicates the bleed. I'm going to want to carry everything over to this bleed. This will be eventually trimmed off in the printing process, and this will be where it actually is shown. And so that's just for the printing process to have a little extra leeway just in case the machine prints off a few centimeters or a few millimeters. So that's just for the printer. We won't see anything in that little area, but sometimes it's required by printers if you're going to get this sent off and printed. So let's go ahead and get the layout concept. We're going to do a couple of different layout ideas, and we're just going to brainstorm, and I'm going to go through this raw process. I have not thought about this project ahead of time. I just have the branding elements right over here. This is all I have, so you get to kind of go with me as I think about how to lay this out. So before I bring over my branded assets, I want to go to View, and I want to go down to Rulers. So View, Rulers, and Show Rulers. When I do layout design, I like to have my rulers on. I don't really care for it when I'm doing other things like social media graphics, but when I'm doing print projects, I love to be able to have my rulers so I know sizing-wise where I'm at with particular objects. It also helps out when I'm doing layout stuff and I'm thinking about the rule of thirds. So let's talk about the rule of thirds. What is the rule of thirds? We're going to do a little trick so we can go ahead and set up the rule of thirds. Basically, it's 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines that evenly divides a particular piece into 9 squares. And wherever you see the kind of coming together of 2 squares, usually ends up being nice places to position a certain piece. So I'm just going to show you this in action, and we'll be able to apply it later to kind of make sure if we're not sure about a certain placement, we can bring in our little grid and we can figure out if we like the placement. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to do a box, just a simple box. Let's just make it a solid color. Go ahead and bring this back down, and I'm going to show you a little trick. So I'm just highlighting my box. I'm going to Object, going down to Path, and going down to Split into Grid. And we're going to be able to split this into 9 even boxes. So split into grid, and I'm going to do 2 rows. I'm going to do preview, or 3 rows and 3 columns. And so now that I have my 3 columns and my 3 rows, I'm going to be able to add guides. So go ahead and click on Add Guides, and that's going to add these little guides at the end. We're going to click on OK. And we're going to delete what we just created, but we're going to keep those guides in place. So I'm just deleting all these little boxes. And you'll notice it created these thin little lines. And this will be your rule of thirds that'll help us with placement. And so a lot of times if you have a particular object and you're not sure where to place it, sometimes tucking it right in the corner of a rule of thirds will be a nice position. And so what we're going to do so this doesn't interfere with our other elements is we're just going to select this entire grid that we just made. Make sure those are grouped, and they are grouped. I'm going to go over to my Layers panel. I'm going to go ahead and drag this over here. I'm creating a new layer right down here, and I'm going to copy and paste that into my layer. So there's a special way I'm going to copy and paste. So I'm going to go up to Edit. Let's go ahead and cut it out. You can do the keyboard shortcut if you want to. I'm going to paste it in the new layer. But what I'm going to do, instead of just pasting it, because I can paste it, but it's going to be shifted a little bit over. And I don't want that. I want it pasted exactly in that same position. I'm going to go up to Edit and do Paste in Place. And what Paste in Place is going to do is going to paste it in the exact place that I cut it out. So it's not going to shift it at all. So that's kind of a neat trick for uses on when you're copying and pasting photos that need to remain the exact same space. Just do Edit and then Paste in Place. So now that it's here, I'm going to lock that layer because I don't want that layer to be changed or shifted in a new way. So this is a locked layer. I'm going to go back to my layer 1, and this is where my design is going to reside. We'll just call that rule of thirds. Oops, if I could spell that right. Rule of thirds. And that's our grid. We also have our other grid, which we can toggle with our little shortcut. I'm going to do Command and then the quotation. And this will also be another help. And we don't use those at the same time. So the rule of thirds is something to keep in mind when we're doing the basic part of the layout, but it's not something we always have to have on. So if I do Command and do my quotation mark, I'm going to get my main grid. So this is really going to help with more minute placements of typography. This will help us align typography to the top portion, and we have typography on the bottom. It's nice to have that grid to be able to feel like we know where certain boxes should end and certain text boxes should line up. So I'm going to toggle this off and on using my shortcut throughout this design. So Command quotation, I'm going to go ahead and turn it off for now. So remember our rule of thirds. I'm going to go back to the layering system and toggle that visibility on. You can toggle it all on and off so you can have it there the whole time you're designing, or if it bothers you, you can toggle it off. So I'm having it toggled on, and you can kind of see the small kind of lines that were created. So let's see if we can't position things according to these lines. That'll maybe make it seem a little more clean. So I'm going to take the logo and size it up so it fits perfectly in that bottom box, bottom middle box. We could even align the little M of the Parsons Dynamics website to the right of this line. Take the eyedropper tool and resize our phone number to the same size, and can maybe tuck it over to this side. So you can kind of see how it helps guide us and make certain design choices. And it's not perfect, so you see this little top of the box here? I know it's a little bit hard to see. I should probably go in and change that so it's a little bit darker. Let me see if I can't do that. Let me unlock this for you. Let's see if I can't make that stroke a little thicker for you. There we go. That's much better. So let's go ahead and lock that layer and go back to our other layer. So I notice this box is so close to that other first layer of boxes. Let's go ahead and line that up, because why not? It's not going to affect our layout too dramatically. Okay, and let's maybe rest this line here, or have it start here. We'll have to finesse this typography first before we continue further. We could even crop the photo so it comes down here on this middle part, but then again, we gotta see design is first. This is just a guide. It's not a science. So let's go ahead and toggle this off, and let's do one more thing. I'm going to do my view and go to grids, or I can do my little shortcut and do command quotation and get my grids on. Kind of see what the grids say. So you can use the rule of thirds, or you can use the grids as kind of guides. And sometimes you have to kind of shift certain elements out to be able to see the grids underneath. So in this case, I might maybe align it to the grid system, the typography here. Let's play around with this font choice and get our headline situated, and then we'll be able to kind of go back to the grid and get everything kind of nicely laid out. So let's get this headline nice and situated. So in terms of font choice, let me toggle the grid off. We had a couple of font choices when we were developing the logo that we went with. And we did a custom version of the logo, so we don't have necessarily a typeface that matches the rounded corners. So we're going to find something that's close. So this is Azo Sans Black. This is what we used to develop our rounded corners down here. So we're going to use that as our main headline font choice. So I'm just going to go ahead and drive out the eyedropper tool, go ahead and sample our text. And we have lowercase used for our type on Parsons, so we could play around with the idea of also keeping this lowercase to kind of have a design theme. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the character panel, which you can find over here or you can find up here. But I'm going to use the one right here. Let's go ahead and tuck transparency away. Okay, so I have the character panel. I'm going to play around with spacing here. And let me first make this white. There we go. So this spacing is way too wide. There's a gap. It doesn't feel very connected. So we're going to connect these a little bit. And we're going to go over the character panel, and we're going to set the leading. It's called leading, and that's the spacing between the lines. We're going to tuck this nicely. So see how that Y is nice and tucked into that space. That space is closed. It's not so tight that it overlaps. There's a little bit of breathing room, but not a huge gap. That's what we're going to look for. So now that we have kind of our font choice and the leading situated, we have also the spacing between the type. And with lowercase letters, I like to have a little bit of a tighter spacing. Because if you do, I'll go ahead and show you an example, wider spacing with lowercase type, it feels a little disconnected. So let's bring it back to the -25. And we want this to be the largest element. We want to have balance with our design, so we want to make sure some things are larger and some things are smaller. That'll be kind of our big kind of grabber headline. We also want to adapt this. So let's go ahead and get the eyedropper tool, sample this, and go ahead and hold down Shift and make that a lot smaller. We could even play around. Let's see if we even have an italic. I think with this typeface, I don't have a choice to make it italic. And that's okay because we have a second type choice we can have, this dynamics down here in the logo. See this, I believe this is railway. So we can just ungroup this text, go ahead and copy, or just have it right here. I have railway medium. So let's play off the second type choice that we have with the logo. We're going to make it white. And let's have some nice wide spacing, but let's also make it all caps. So I'm in the character panel. I'm going to click here to this extra options area. This is just a quick way to do in all caps, or you can make them small caps, or you could do a subscript. This is kind of where those options are. So I'm going to make this a all cap and just close the spacing until I feel like it's at a good spacing. So let's go ahead and skip down to 444, a little bit more spacing, 555. Great. So now we have this nice clean option, and let's actually make it a tighter spacing so I can make the type a little bigger. There we go. Just kind of messing around with spacing and size. I have several weights with railway. That's why railway is so amazing. Let's do a semi-bold to make sure that people can really see this when it's printed. And we can even change up this text. Instead of it all being the same weight, we can really bring emphasis by making one word bolder. So have an idea, let's build it together. What's the most important word for this particular piece? Have an idea? Okay, that's not as important. Let's build it together. So two words that really pop out to me is the word build and together. So both of those are very important. So which one do we highlight? I'm probably going to do build because Parsons Dynamics is an industrial manufacturer. So what they do is they build things for you. So that's the word we really want to highlight. And so understanding the branding and the kind of the ethos or what the company stands for really helps to understand as a designer, so you know what words to bring out and what words to emphasize. So we're going to make this black, which is the boldest weight available. So have an idea, let's build it together. And I'm also noticing I need to continue to tighten that spacing. Okay, so this is just kind of the trial and error of doing a layout. And I'm going to make that back to regular medium weight to have a higher contrast between that bold and then the lighter weight. And what I like to do, instead of expanding and having everything go right to the edge, I like to have lots of white space and breathing room. It really adds a sense of professionalism and cleanliness to a design. So notice how this is stretched all the way across. I'm using 100% of the real estate here, but sometimes it's nice to be able to make this small and have it in the center and have lots and lots of room here. Doesn't it kind of bring a clean professionalism? It just kind of helps it just look better. And you don't have people, I don't know, a lot of people stretch it all the way across because they want to make sure that the viewer sees it, but they'll see it. As long as the text is legible when it's printed, you can make it any size. Because I know a lot of designers are like, I don't want to make it so small that they can't read it. But trust me on this one, sometimes making it a little bit smaller like that is a good trade-off, because it helps to bring out all the other elements and to make it look clean and professional. That's the whole goal of this particular project. So sometimes it's not wise to stretch all the way to the edge, but to have that extra padding there, an extra margin. And so the same thing with our little contact information. So let's go ahead and bring out, we can take the eyedropper tool and sample the railway, or we could bring out our headline font. And let's see what the headline font looks like. Let's just choose black for right now. We have to make that a lot smaller. Okay, I really like this bolder type over the railway, so we're going to keep with the Azo Sans. So let's get our rule of thirds back out because I just messed up the location of that. And when it comes to point size, this is an 8.5 by 11 flyer, and I have this up here, if you see up here, the character panel, or right here in the character panel. I can have it as small as 8 points, and it could still be legible. I don't like to have anything lower than 8 points, unless it's fine print or like a legal copy or something where it's all rights reserved. That can be 6 points. But me personal, 8 is my level where I really don't want to make it smaller than 8 points. And that's just because it's a legibility issue. So this is the smallest I would recommend having it, but it's way too small. But just kind of letting you know that that's kind of the limit I have in terms of size. So I'm going to up this just a little bit in size. This is important information, but it's not, if they need to get the contact information, they'll see it. It doesn't need to be like a billboard where you have the number super duper large. It just looks tacky if you do that on a flyer. So we're going to have this nice and subtle. We could line it on the rule of thirds, or we can end up bringing out our grids and finding kind of a nice placement there. So let's switch to our brown color. That seems to be our theme. Let's switch off the rule of thirds for a moment so that doesn't get in our way. Okay. So now it's where we can kind of mess with the photo. Maybe it blurs a little bit more. So let's get that feathering effect back out. So let's do feather. I'm just going to go ahead and apply a feather and then bring that up a little bit, because we don't have so much real estate just for that headline. We really want the photo to be a focus. So we can have this left aligned, but we do tend to have like a really strong center alignment with this piece, especially at the bottom. So what if we continue to play with that and we keep this center aligned? As much as I love left alignment, but let's have a nice center. We're committing to a particular alignment. It's going to be center aligned. Instead of having a left alignment and then you have a center, it seems disorganized. But when you commit to a particular type of alignment, it looks really good. And we're going to try a couple of different layouts so we can play around with alignment. So we're not just going to do this one option. So I was able to lighten this photo a little bit, and this could be a nice soft flyer option or layout option. I think this is very soft. But let's say we want to play a little bit more with color, maybe have a different layout option and a photo option for a client or for ourselves if we're doing this for ourselves. So let's play around with a different option. I'm going to go ahead and save this version. And a couple things we could do is we could create different artboards so we can see all of our layouts together. So I think that's what we're going to do after this saves. So just go to File, Document Setup, and let's get that Edit Artboard option available. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new one. I'm just going to add it at the same size, but we're going to shift it over a little bit. Eliminate that one, and let's bring in a really bright, vivid, colorful one. Let's take a different direction to see what way the client wants to go with this, because we're still working on their brand, we're still working on their color palette. Oh, that needs to be brought down. I found this photo on Pexels.com, which is a great place to find free photos to work with. You don't have to pay for them, and you have the full rights to use them in your artwork. Let's play around with some different palette ideas to really bring out the color here. So I'm going to go to our logo and make some color changes real quick. I'm going to highlight one of these really cool colors. So maybe that purple. And that was a pretty quick transition. Let's also highlight and bring out some different colors. Kind of a lighter shade. Maybe bring maybe an orange tone out on this. Maybe make it dark. There we go. Maybe bring the orange out in the copy. So now we're getting a little bit more of a modern kind of layout. So let's play around significantly with this. We could do one line of type, and then we can feather this photo a little bit. Let's go to Effect, Stylize, let's feather it just a little bit. And let's put a solid color box behind it. I'm not going to worry about bleed yet, so I'm designing everything to the black line. I'll worry about bleed later. I'm going to arrange and send this one to the back. Instead of fading to white, it fades into a nice rich color. So let's go to our, I want to change that. So let me go to Appearance panel and let me make it a more dramatic shadow. So I'm just doing 2.2 inches so that we can really make sure this pops out. I'm trying not to use too many colors, trying to keep it to maybe 2 or 3. Maybe there's a lighter orange I can use here. Let's try something a little different. Let's bring our white logo in. And let's make this a full solid instead of having bars. Let's do this. And I need to go in and change this color on this logo over here real quick. Okay, so we have our logo adapted. Let's go ahead and zoom out and get a good idea of blocking. So I like this layout a little bit. What we could do is bring this down, and we'll be able to bring down the cropping. Let's crop this photo. So we're going to do this again. So we're going to go ahead and grab our box and go ahead and draw where we think we would like it to be cropped. I just want to crop a little bit up there so it fades a little nicer. I'm going to bring this down, crop it right about there. Double click both of these, and I'm going to right click and make a clipping mask, and it's going to crop it right where I want it. And I'm going to go back and add that same feather I had. There we go. So now I'm just going to, now I have some nice area for our big headline. And let's bring out even more color here. I wonder if we can't, let's go ahead, I'm just going to draw a box here so I can sample my yellow. See if we can't make that yellow. Make that a little bit bigger now that's no longer in that box. Or what we can do is bring more emphasis, make that white again, and we can bring more emphasis to our build by making that a different color. So we have it a little bit. We can also bring out dynamics, a different color. I'm going to go ahead and cut this word out and try something a little bit more creative with the headline. Instead of just having one type going across, can't see if we can't tuck that in a little bit. And notice how I'm kind of lining up the R and the D, and how that Y kind of tucks nicely into that space. And we could play around with color and have two different colors here, or we could do white. And what's the most important word is redesigned, so let's make this white. So the color one is redesigned. I'm going to make that photo a little bit smaller. And there we go. I think we're pretty close on this one. I want to make sure there's the same spacing here as there is right here. So we're going to switch into grid. I'm going to do command and I'm going to do the quotation mark. Switch into grid. I'm just going to remove this background or lower it a little bit so I can line this up a little better. Let's make this black for now. I'm just going to line this up on the grid. Oh, that lines up almost perfectly. I just need to make it a little bit bigger. So you notice how the D is on this line and the I is on that line. Just kind of helps guide me a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to toggle grid off and bring our color back up. And then make our industry white again. And I have a pattern that I used. I developed this pattern when I did the logo design. You can't see it, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it over. And it's just kind of this little X pattern that I created. And I'll put a video here in this class to show you how to create patterns, just in case you want to do the same thing. So I feel like I can maybe incorporate this pattern somehow. I'm just not sure how yet. Just to extend that brand asset somehow. So it could even just be two simple rows of X's that go across the bottom there as an element. Doesn't overpower, doesn't overwhelm. It's just a really subtle element, and people can know that it's tied to the brand because they'll see it elsewhere in the branding. It could be down here on the bottom. So I'm going to play around with this and see if I can't find a better placement. So what I decided to do was I wasn't liking the way it was feathering at the top. It seemed kind of harsh and I couldn't get it to be a more gradual kind of look. And since this is an industrial company, I really want to have these nice sharp edges. So I decided to go back. I went to my appearance panel and I deleted the feathering. And I went back to my transparency and took off the blending mode, made it normal. So I basically brought back the original photo, exactly how it was. And I just have a box here. I'm going to crop it. So I'm going to make a box and crop it right about here. I like how this looks right here. That connects nicely. And I believe we already made sure the left and the right sides are good. And we want to have a little bit more space up top because we make sure we have margins, especially if this is going to be a design in a magazine. You want to make sure you have lots of margin around your piece. So that is a fantastic second option. Totally different from the first one, isn't it? Now that I'm looking at the first one, I'm realizing we can make some tweaks to make it even better. So I do think it needs a higher contrast bar here. So what if we adapted to make that it needs a contrasting color. And I think what goes really well with brown and tans is blue. So let's go, if you know a little bit of color theory, you'll know that those go really well together, brown and blue. Let's try to find a blue that's deep enough. See, that could work really well. I think once you move away from one layout and you go back to it, you start to see little mistakes and ways to improve it. What we could do is, since we really like the way this is laid out, we could bring it over to our other layout and adapt it. There we go. So just kind of tweaking that to make it a little bit better. So we can make this a little bit bigger, try to find the right balance, maybe do a drop shadow on that. So I'm just going to go to Effect, Stylize, and Drop Shadow. And I want to add a really subtle shadow. So I'm going to do Preview, back that off to maybe 15%. And let's reduce the spacing. So 0.01, 0.01, and reduce the blur as well. Just enough to make it pop against that light background, since this is also light. There's always room for improvement and tweaking. What do you think about that? Yes, that looks great. I like the change to blue. So we have the, option 1, option 2, very different. We can bring our pattern over here if we wanted to. We could put it over top this little bar. And I think I have to go back into swatches. This is our little pattern. I'll teach you how to do patterns here shortly. Have our little pattern here. I'm going to make it white. Boop, and save it. We'll go over this in a little bit. There we go. There's my little pattern. Let's send it backwards into the layering system. And voila. Okay, so let's do one final layout. Let's make this one a little bit more detailed and complicated. Let's add this copy into it and see if we can work that in with maybe 3 different photos. And we can work with cropping a little bit more and how to work with a little bit more complex amount of data. Because right now we only have a couple of lines of copy. It's very easy to lay out. But when you start to add more information that needs to be read, it starts to get more complicated. So I want to do one more layout that incorporates more information that you have to somehow make readable, professional, and clean. So for this third and final layout, I'm going to do a little bit of blocking ahead of time. So I brought kind of some elements over to save a little bit of time. And I go toggle my grid. So I'm going to do Command and quotation to get my grid. And I'm going to start to block this out. So I think the important part is finding out where to work in this pretty large block of copy. We don't need this have an idea, let's build it together, because we already have that. So I'm going to bring out my paragraph panel. And you notice how it has a wonderful left alignment. It looks great, but you have this ragged right alignment. And you also have these hyphens that are dividing very simple words like company, and we don't want that. Clients never like hyphens. So let's go ahead and highlight all of our text, and we're in our paragraph, and we're going to unclick hyphenate. So that's going to make it where they don't have any more hyphens, which is fantastic. When you have smaller columns, hyphens are really important. When you have a column that small, you almost have to do hyphens. But for something like this, you don't really need hyphens, and it really makes it look nicer. So now we get to mess around with alignment. So I'm going to highlight them all, and there's a couple of them you can do. You can do center alignment, right alignment. These are all pretty standard alignments, but the one that I love the most is justify with last line align left. What this does is it aligns everything flush on the left side, but also the right side. So it just looks like a wonderful block of copy. This is great when it comes to layout design, when you do editorial magazines where you have much larger blocks of copy. It looks really nice. So I just kind of did that alignment, and I took away the highlights, or the hyphens, pardon me. So I'm going to highlight everything, and right now this is Myriad Pro. We want to go ahead and adapt one of our font choices. I think that Azo Sans. I don't have a lot of choices with weight. So let's see what happens here. Let's see how that's a pretty large block of copy. Let's see if I can make this a little bit longer. I like how that looks, but there's just too much of a block of copy. So there's a couple things we can do. We could do our thicker, bolder font for the first line and the copy. Go ahead and make this smaller. And then I can highlight this part of the copy and make it the smaller railway font, which I believe was it this one? But I want to do it from scratch. So I'm going to go up here and do railway and do a regular weight, make it smaller, and then reduce what is called the spacing or the leading between the spacing between the lines. I'm just going to reduce that. I'm in the character panel. I'm going to leave some white spacing here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to highlight these three lines. I'm adjusting the leading to find the right spacing. Okay, and I want to make sure there's a line break here to divide that copy up. So let's go ahead and get our grid back on and see if I can't make this a little bit smaller. Let's do 14 and then reduce the leading a little more. And make sure we have our justify with last line align left for that one. But for this top one, let's do a left alignment. It's not letting me do that unless I divide it into two separate boxes. That's no problem. I'm going to copy and paste. And I'm going to separate these two elements, which is probably wise anyway because they're so different. So now I have a little bit more control over each box. And now I can keep that as a left alignment. And let's make sure the hyphenate is unclicked. And now I could take this box and make sure hyphenate is unclicked and click on our justify left. So let's bring this down and put a dividing line. Okay, and we're just doing some blocking out of our type. Okay, so we can make this probably a smaller size. So remember, we don't want to go under 8. So let's keep it at 12 points and close the gap a little bit. This is smaller body copy. We don't have to have as much spacing. Let's have our little dividing line here. Go flush with that paragraph. And there we go. Let's do a left alignment here. This is why we have them as separate elements. I think that just looks better. So let's start really utilizing the grid system here. Let me close the gap between that just a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of put this on the grid a little bit. So I'm just zooming in. I'm putting this line right here. If I have 2 spaces between here and the line, let's try 2 spaces between here and our other smaller body copy. And let's maybe bring this all the way to this line. So you notice the grid is helping me find out where I can make the thickness of that copy. So let's bring in our headline now. Let's keep with this nice left alignment here. And we can keep this going here so the headline kind of goes a little bit over to the right. And so this have an idea, build it together. Let's make it flush. Let's make it where the R ends right here at the line of the grid. And we can worry about this other contact information later. So let's toggle off the grid. Let's find a way to work in these photos. I want to work in 3 photos with this layout. So we're going to kind of make them all the same size. And we could do some cropping here. So here's what we can do with blocking. Let's get our rectangle tool and let's make 3 different boxes. Let's use our grid system. Let's make it 6 full grid system boxes. I'm just going to copy and paste. Copy and paste. And we're going to see how we can work in these 3 photos. We could do them even like this. And now that we have them all the same size, we could just go like this and make them a little bit more narrow. Let's make them 3 circles. Let's make them different sizes. So let's make them different colors so we know which circle is which. And this is where we're going to use the cropping tool again. So let's figure out people is most important for your people shot. So let's bring in the people shot to be the bigger circle. And we're going to click on this and also click on our circle. We're going to right click and make clipping mask. And now that it's cropped, we can take our direct selection tool, select on the photo, and we can shift that photo around the cropping. Or we can go back into the selection tool and hold down shift and be able to make it smaller and get the right cropping. We're going to do the same thing with the other photos. Go ahead and make it shorter. I'm going to select both, right click, clipping mask. And let's bring out the material a little more in that. So I'm just making this smaller. We could put a yellow border on them. So we can take the eyedropper tool, sample that yellow, switch it to a stroke, and let's bring our stroke panel out and make that a little thicker. Okay, do that. Let's bring our purple background and really start to put this together. Let's get our purple background, right click, send that to the back. Let's make this all white for now. And then make our redesigned yellow. And just make that yellow too. Let's get a swatch of yellow. Sample that yellow so we can always click back and use our eyedropper tool. Okay, we can also do the line yellow. So this is really coming together. I think the stroke is a little too thick, so we're going to select it all and reduce the stroke a tad. And let's do a nice drop shadow on these. You click all of them, go to drop shadow, preview. Let's make it a nice long shadow. So let's do a big blur. Let's put a little distance here. And let's do 33, see if that's not too strong. And let's make this a little bigger. Let's put that on top. And now we can make this all yellow, or even better, make that white and bring out that build as yellow to have that nice high contrast. And let's play with that nice left alignment here, and let's tuck that right here with enough space to make it a different thought. So I don't want this to read as one big block, so I'm putting a little distance here. Let's also left align our logo, and we could bring back our grid and align everything we want to. Let's have this continually stretch across here. So I like this overall layout. There's not any huge gaps. There's nice margin here between everywhere. We can do something kind of fun for the background, so it's not kind of a boring background. We could bring in our little texture. We can bring in one of our other photos. Bring in our little texture that we made. Right, that can also be in the bottom. We can do a blending mode and bring in another photo. I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm pretty happy with this layout. What I like to do when I have type here, make it 1 notch smaller. Let's make it 11 points. I like to bring out a word every once in a while. So our main focus, and what I'm going to do is this bold focus. It's going to do a bold. And that kind of helps break down this type a little bit. So our main focus is to help design, produce, and mass produce any product imaginable. So how about any product, let's highlight any. I'm just picking out a word that I think would help it read a little better. Let's see, our talented team. Talented team's pretty important. Let's bring out that. Okay, and I probably need to do some spell check on that. It's kind of some generic copy. And we could do the same thing here, where maybe this is white. Right, but I kind of like it simple, kind of less back and forth. Let's make that a little smaller and bring that down a little bit more so I can connect it with the rest of the type. And I'm just noodling around with spacing, making sure I add enough. I have lots of room here, so there's no excuse. Bring that over to utilize that space. Make sure people's heads are not covered and there's enough nice cropping with the photography. All right, so one more thing and we're done with this entire project. Let me grab one more photo. I wonder if I can grab this people photo, see what that looks like. So that's being brought over, and I'm going to do a different blending mode. So I'm going to break out my transparency panel. Hopefully you guys are learning through repetition, kind of a lot of this. I'm going to right click, I'm going to bring that backwards and then bring it forward. I'm doing command right bracket. I'm bringing it so I can bring it back and forth. So I have luminosity at 50%. So I have a luminosity blending mode. And I have all these different windows open. I apologize, I'm a mess when I create. That's okay. And the key here is we can use it this way. So the people are looking to the left, but they're looking off the page. And kind of a design, I guess, theory kind of idea is to have people look toward the center of a design piece. So instead of people looking away and off the page, you have people look toward the page. So when you ever want to crop a particular photo, that could help you make the choice of whether I did the left or the right side. I want people looking inward toward the other photos. It kind of helps the kind of a psychological thing there where people see someone looking somewhere, you look toward that direction. So this could be, I'm a little concerned it's a tiny bit busy, but let me see if I can't maybe not have that texture up top. So let's eliminate that altogether. I'm going to try one more photo to see if it works better, and then I think we are done. All right, we're in the home stretch. One more photo to test out. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the photo we had to see if this one works better. So I'm going to, in my transparency, I'm going to set it to the same luminosity, and I'm going to reduce the opacity and also do a feather. So I'm going to go down to stylize and feather that so it blends in nicely. You don't see the edges. Okay, let's make it a little bit bigger so you can see the texture on it. And okay, so luminosity is not working. Let me go ahead and send this to the back. So I know that's all the way in the background there. And let's do a couple of different ones. Let's try an overlay. Okay, so overlay, let's make it a little stronger so we can see what effect that blending mode is having. I like hard light a lot, so let's see if hard light looks. It's just experimenting with the different blending modes, which you can also do in Photoshop. Soft light is looking the best so far. So thank you for joining me on this kind of adventure. I know it was kind of a long chapter in this class, but I just wanted to show you my raw design process. It's not a matter of coming up with the perfect layout, using the grid right away. It's more complicated than that, and it involves kind of some brainstorming and blocking out of your type to kind of find out what works for you and what works for the client. These are three very different types of projects. And I'm going to do one more thing, and that's going to be able to export these files. So let's say we chose one final one. So what we're going to do is go ahead and delete the first one and delete the third one, and let's say this is the one we really want to adapt around. And we might need multiple versions depending on if they like that small copy or not. So I'm going to delete that artboard, and I'm going to delete this artboard, and we're left with one left. And let's go to File, Document Setup, and somehow our bleeds got knocked off during the process of creating new artboards. That's okay. We're going to go ahead and make sure the bleeds are on. So I just went to Document Setup and have 1/8 bleed all the way around. We're going to bring everything, this is going to be for print. We're going to send this off to a printer to print maybe 10,000 of these. So we're going to just make sure everything goes off to the edge. Where we have it right now is exactly where it's going to be printed. So this is just extra left over for the printer to work with, just in case the printer machine doesn't work perfectly. I'm just getting the direct selection tool since this is a cropped photo, and I'm just bringing it all the way to the edge. Okay. All right, that's off the edge. It's going to take this pattern, make that go off the edge, and down to here, and that's it. We've added bleed to this product, or to this flyer. So before we export, there's two final things if we're going to get this printed that we need to do. We need to create outlines with all live text. So we can hand select each item, each text item. We can right click and then we can create outlines. Or if there's a ton of text on this document, you can do a little shortcut and go to Select, go down to Object, and go down to All Text Objects. So it's going to automatically select all text objects. You can right click and create outlines. The printers always require you to create outlines on all documents to make sure that text is not editable and it's kind of final. So that's one step. And then also you want to make sure your poster is in CMYK mode. You don't want to have RGB mode because that's for print. And since we're kind of designing this poster to be used for digital and print, that's why I currently have it set to RGB. So all we're going to do is go ahead and get our document switched to the CMYK color mode. So we're going to go to File. We're going to go down to Document Color, and there's CMYK. We're just going to switch it over to CMYK mode. And it's going to automatically convert all of our colors. If we need to go in and fine tune any of the colors to make it match what we had in RGB, we can. Sometimes it'll darken the colors a little bit because they're different color profiles. So if you ever wanted to switch it back, go to File, Document Color Mode, and you can switch back to RGB for when you do digital documents. All right, so now we're ready to export it. We're going to go to File, Save As. I like to do PDFs because it keeps them in vector format. So we're going to go down to PDF, click on Save, and this is the Illustrator default. So go ahead and click on Illustrator default and I'll show you how to kind of export this as a press-ready document. So I like to unclick Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities because this means that someone can access the layers and edit this. But the problem is it makes it a really big file size, and the printer does not need to go in and edit this. You've already done all the edits. So go ahead and click this off because it's going to make the file size a lot smaller, which is good. Go down to Compression. Don't worry, the default's fine. Marks and Bleed. We want the trim marks clicked. So just click on Trim Marks and it's going to show them where to trim the bleed. So include the document bleed settings, which we set up when we started the document. Everything else, fine. Output, don't worry about it. A lot of these, don't worry about it for right now, unless the printer has a particular request. Okay, so you can save in a particular format. 2003 is something that I've always done, the 1A, but I've been doing none for years and I've had no complaints. So go ahead and click Save As, and we are going to go ahead. It says, saving this document with Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities turned off. Don't worry about it. The printer does not need to edit this. So we click on Save, and we have our PDF ready to rock and roll. Here's our poster, and you're going to see the crop marks added. That's where the bleed, where they know to trim off the bleed that we added. So let's go ahead and do 50%, and we can see our final document as a PDF. Go ahead and test that out. So 25%, there's our final document ready to go to the printer. So let's say I want to adapt this now to digital mediums. So I'm going to go to File, Document Setup. I don't really need bleed, so I'm just going to take it down to 0. And I'm going to save it as a JPEG. So let me do to File. Don't want to do Save As. If I'm doing something for the web, it's Export. So File, Export, Export as a JPEG. And just like that, we have a JPEG. And then we have a JPEG and a PDF, and we can resize this. We can go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards. We can add a new artboard and make it an Instagram post just by making it 1,000 by 1,000. And we can copy and paste that and be able to adapt our design to a different layout, maybe removing a particular element to make it work. And so we did this poster design because now we can scale it up to a larger size or a smaller size like the Instagram. So I'm going to go to Document Setup. I'm going to scale this higher to a big poster design. So we had a flyer, and now just like this, I just highlighted all my elements. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag, and I'm going to be able to adapt this to a large poster size very, very easily.